I just want to thank everyone for joining our webinar this morning in our 2025 series of the City of Seattle hosted integrated pest management and recertification webinars. This is the final of 3 webinars offered in the series this year. My name is Kate Kurtz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be the facilitator this morning. A bit about me, I'm the Organics and Landscape Resource Conservation Program Lead for Seattle Public Utilities, but I'm just one of several members of the IPM Webinar Planning Committee, which is comprised of representatives from several City of Seattle departments. All right, great. So before we kick off, I do want to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people, specifically here in Seattle, the Muckleshoot, Duwamish, Suquamish, and Snoqualmie, who are still here and have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. I want to recognize and thank them for hosting us before beginning this event today. Okay, so now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ryan Garrison. Good morning, Ryan. Thank you for joining us today. Ryan is going to speak about IPM at the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. And so likely all of us know that UWBG hosts a wide selection of rare and sensitive plant species, and Ryan's presentation will cover their methods of scouting and treating of pests of pathogens that threaten this amazing plant collection, and also share some of the research done at the gardens. So a bit about Ryan. After graduating from Michigan State University with a degree in horticulture in 2002, Ryan moved to the Pacific Northwest, and he's worked at the University of Washington Botanic Garden since 2003 and is currently the plant healthcare specialist there. He has a deep passion for using plant collections in teaching and research, and in 2020 he got his master's degree at UW, where he studied the azalea lacebug feeding on arboretum rhododendrons. He's currently pursuing his PhD, studying the effect of the evolutionary history on plant-insect interactions. That is awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me. Always nice to talk about what I've been up to and what we do at the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. All right, so my schedule today is to do a short intro to the University of Washington Botanic Gardens, who we are and what we do. I'll give a quick introduction on IPM, specifically its application at the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. Now I'll go into some pests and diseases that we actively manage here. And then we'll take a look at some pests and diseases that threaten our plant collection. All right, so first of all, the University of Washington Botanic Gardens was established in 2005 to unite the gardens and programs of the Washington Park Arboretum. There, just southeast of the university campus, which was founded in 1934. And the Center for Urban Horticulture, which opened in 1984. The Arboretum has 230 acres of woodlands, wetlands, gardens, and trails. It's jointly managed by the University of Washington, Seattle Parks and Recreation, and the Arboretum Foundation. The Center for Urban Horticulture includes 16 acres of landscaped gardens with different buildings and gardens, and the 74-acre Union Bay Natural Area. It's a restoration site on the old Montlake dump. So our mission is sustaining managed to natural ecosystems and human spirit through plant research, display, and education. UWBG holds this land and these plants in the public trust to be maintained for present and future generations to use. We keep them as healthy as possible to the best of our ability, which means using integrated pest management. So I know you're all familiar with what IPM is, hopefully, so don't worry, I only have one slide on this. So one of my favorite quotes about IPM, even though it's a long and doozy of a sentence, is that IPM programs use current comprehensive information on the life cycles of pests and their interaction with the environment in combination with available pest control methods to manage pest damage by the most economical means and with the least possible hazard to people, property, and the environment. It's a complicated process, but it boils down to using the current information that we have available to use the best available control method to cause the least amount of collateral damage. So IPM is not a single pest control method, but rather it's a cycle of pest management evaluations, decisions, and controls. So you just have to go back. It's a cycle. Evaluate what you did, do something else. Look at all your options. So the University of Washington Botanic Gardens have some unique assets and strengths, but those strengths also present unique challenges for implementing an IPM program. The first is that we are free and open to the public. Anything we spray can and will be used against us. People come here and they touch the leaves, they put their faces in the flowers to smell the plants. And that's great. That's what we're here for. But we have to be cognizant of that whenever we consider spraying any pesticides or implementing any programs. We have extensive programming here at the UWBG, including child and adult education, classes, tours, weddings, conferences, etc. More and more. It's amazing how much we do here. So it's really important to coordinate with partners to make sure we're not impacting these programs and that we're minimizing exposure to all of our guests and ourselves. We have a large and diverse site with different conditions and goals. For example, we have our more formal gardens, such as the Soist Garden at the Center for Urban Horticulture or Rhododendron Glen at the Arboretum. So these areas will need a different approach than, say, the Union Bay Natural Area, where our goal is to restore Puget Sound lowland prairie scrub forest. So here our main pests are large mammals such as beavers or rabbits, deer, humans, and our main focus is invasive weed removal. We also have a wide range of topography and a variety of site conditions. We have wetlands and streams on site, which all drain into Lake Washington. So on some sites, it's important to be very careful how and what we spray. We're restricted to products labeled for aquatic use in those areas. We want to make sure we're not spraying into the lake. We also have the UW farm on site, which is a student-led organic farm. So we're further limited on what we're able to spray and how we do things there. And we also have a greenhouse. So that's a completely different set of pests and approaches. We also have an amazingly diverse plant collection, which includes over 14,500 accession specimens, 4,000 different types of trees, shrubs, and other plants native to 98 different countries, adding more all the time. So this kind of creates a very unique situation where we have the hosts of pretty much any insect out there. So we really have to be careful. Take a look. So we have to ask some unique questions in a public garden, botanic garden. Choose options. Choose to intervene. Our IPM program. For example, what are the research, conservation, ecological, or ornamental value of the plants? Some germplasm is not easily replaced, and great efforts are made to save and/or propagate from those specimens, while other plants that are severely infested or infected, we might just remove those from the collection to prevent the spread of pathogens. So like in this slide, we have a research plot. We have a Willemmy pine, extremely rare conifer, and Franklinia, which is extinct in the wild. So these sort of plants we would go above and beyond to protect, while others maybe we would be better off just getting rid of them, planting something else. What are the consequences of not intervening? Right here we have Toledo before and after emerald ash borer. This is a pretty famous photograph, entomological circles anyway. So the left is in June of 2006. First started noticing some tip death and identified emerald ash borer, and 3 years later, almost every tree on that street is dead, and so that impacts our neighborhoods and our forests. And so some pests, it's imperative that we do all we can. What are the risks to staff, students, and the public? There's always a risk to spraying in a public area for exposure. We've learned a lot. Here's a picture of Eastern Washington spraying apples. That's lead arsenic. Not great. So hopefully we've learned quite a bit. Picture, sorry. What are the ecological impacts? So pesticides, anything you do will have cascade effects, such as effects on pollinators like bees, or anything that visits a flower you spray. It might not kill them, but there's kind of downstream effects, sublethal effects. So we have to be really careful on timing and on how we spray. All right, so now I'm going to kind of switch gears and cover some of the pests and diseases that we currently deal with here at the University of Washington Botanic Gardens. So one of the most prominent collections is our cherry collection. We maintain a collection of these flowering cherries, mainly located on Azalea Way. There's 162 trees in the collection. This was planted very early on in the Arboretum's history, mostly in the 40s. So we have lots of cherries all over the place. But cherries face a number of challenges west of the Cascades. And firstly, the cherry bark tortrix. Enarmonia formosana. The cherry bark tortrix is a moth whose larvae bore under the bark of the trunks and the limbs of cherry trees. They're not great at getting into the bark, so they're usually found wounds or on grafts where there's cracks and wounding, so they can get in the least resistance possible. Cherries or prunus are the main hosts, but apples and mountain ash, sorbus, are also affected to a much lesser extent. I sometimes find cherry bark tortrix on sorbus at the base or on large branches of mallows. But these excavations under the bark can become extensive enough to girdle and kill trees. The most obvious sign of infestation are the frass tubes. So these are tubes of excrement, basically, that they use their spinning silk to make a tube. And they're extremely fastidious and will remove all that excrement from their feeding galleries daily, which, good on them for keeping a clean house. But this tidy behavior can be exploited for control. So in late September, all adult flight has ended. All the eggs have hatched. All the pupae have developed. And all the CBT exist as larvae under the bark. And as long as temperature is above freezing, the larvae will visit the tubes pretty much daily. So by treating this frass tube with insecticide, they become exposed when they visit those frass tubes. Hopefully achieve control. Great. So next, I'm going to take a look at blossom brown rot. Monolinia species. There's mainly two fungi that cause this disease here, Monolinia fructicola and laxa. The fungus overwinters on infected twigs and dried fruit, which are sometimes called mummies. So during the spring, the rain comes down and splashes on these dried flowers and leaves and splashes onto new flowers. So yeah, it's not, this fungus isn't great at getting through leaves, but the nice tender tissues of the flowers gets right in and it makes its way up the shoot and can kill whole branches. Because of our typically long rainy springs, which overlaps with the cherry blooming period, brown rot is a perennial problem for cherries in the Pacific Northwest, west of the Cascades. Fortunately for our cherry industry, it's not really a problem on the east side, much drier during their blooming period. So the Arboretum cherry collection is monitored annually for brown rot dieback, and trees experiencing severe dieback are sprayed between February and April. Historically, we would drive the big old bean red sprayer down Azalea Way and spray all the cherries. But presently, we only spray those that exhibit severe dieback, such as Prunus subratella, and its cultivars is an early bloomer, so it gets affected severely, and weeping cherries tend to be really bad because the water just pours down from the infected material on the top and covers everything. Cherries can survive many years with this disease, but infections can eventually lead to plant decline, death. Highly susceptible trees are replaced with resistant varieties, generally later flowering ones. Because Azalea Way, the Prunus collection on Azalea Way is a kind of integral part of Azalea Way. It's a historic planting. Has decided not to phase out these trees, but to plant more cherries there. But we've tried carefully to choose ones that are later flowering or are resistant. All right, now we're gonna pivot again, moving on to our rhododendron collection. So the Arboretum has a substantial rhododendron collection, and several of our gardens are dedicated to rhododendron, such as Azalea Way, Rhododendron Hybrid Garden, and the Rhododendron Glen, amongst others. It makes sense. The Pacific Northwest is an excellent climate for growing almost all species of rhododendron, where only the Virea tropical rhododendrons we can't grow outdoors. Anyway. However, there are some pests that pose a challenge to rhododendron health. One of these is the invasive azalea lacebug, Stephanitis perioides. This is one of the most serious insect pests of rhododendron species, and especially azalea. Just FYI, a few people expressed some interest in this bug, and I have some expertise in it, so I'll be spending a little bit more time on this pest than on others, so hopefully that's okay. The initial damage shows up as light yellow stippling on the surface of the leaves, and higher populations can cause more severe damage on azaleas, causing the leaves to turn nearly white. This pest was introduced to the United States in 1915 on the East Coast, where they grow a lot of azaleas, especially the southeast. The initial damage, sorry about that. Its presence in Washington was not confirmed until 2008, but it has moved around quickly. Adults and eggs are resistant to insecticides, but the immatures are not. So spray is time to control the nymphs before egg hatch, but before the adults appear and start laying eggs is your best time for control. Systemic insecticides, the neonicotinoids and others, can provide control of all stages, but they can have a detrimental effect on beneficial insects, especially bumblebees are the main pollinator of many rhododendrons. Story about that later if I have time. So we want to time treatments for after flowering. So how do you know exactly when to spray those mature nymphs? Well, I'm glad you asked. As it happens, my master's research was aimed to answer that very question. So in 2018 and 2019, I did my data collection. I collected over 14,000 leaves, and on those I counted every bug that I found. So almost 15,000 eggs, 1,500 early instars and almost 2,500 late instars and 652 adults. I spent a lot of time at that microscope. So what we found when we counted those and plotted it against degree days, calendar days, and we found it had 2 full generations per year and a partial third. They, after the big first generation hatch, they exhibit what we call generational smearing, where all the life stages are present all at once. So you have eggs and adults and immatures all over the place, which makes it hard to see what's happening, but they're a long-lived bug. So that happens. So disrupting this first generation of immature instars is especially important. After the adults appear, they're flying around, laying eggs, and you've really missed your window because they are not affected by any sprays, and they're just laying eggs all over the place. You've lost that year. So we created a model from the collection data, and it predicts that mean egg hatch happens at 173 degree days, accumulated degree days, and the first appearance of adults is at 320 accumulated degree days. You might be asking, great, what does that mean for me out here in the real world trying to keep my azaleas alive? Well, we looked at the historical data and identified a treatment window. So right here, for example, if it's an exceptionally warm spring, your treatment window is going to be earlier. They're going to show up and develop earlier. From early May to late June is your window. It's an especially cold year. This one's turning out. Your window will be from late May to late June. But in an average year that's just right, it's from mid-May to mid-June. So sometime in May or June is your target, but you'll need to keep an eye on how warm or cold it's been. Keep an eye on the degree day accumulation if you can for your exact window. There are several degree day calculators I've found online. Most of them aren't great. That's neat. Still working on one. So horticultural oils or soaps are labeled for lace bug control, and they can be very effective against immature stages. But remember, I don't know if I mentioned this, but anyway, all life stages are found on the bottom of the leaves. The azalea lace bug spends its entire life under the leaf, nice and protected. So you'll have to make sure and apply your oils or soaps under the leaves. All right, great. So we also, during the same study, studied azalea lace bug susceptibility, or the rhododendron susceptibility to the lace bug. It had been anecdotally looked at that, there's a great difference in susceptibility. Some are killed quickly and outright, and others are not touched. But very few species or cultivars have been looked at. So I did it. I looked at 71 different rhododendron species and cultivars in the August of 2018 and 19. I collected those leaves and scanned them in the lab and used some software to determine the exact proportion of the leaf that was damaged. I then looked at damage proportions across the rhododendron phylogeny and different hierarchies of taxonomy. And I found when we first looked at the most basic level of separation of rhododendron, we have lepidote and elepidote, which means with scales or without scales. And scales in this case are trichomes. We found that there was no difference, which in retrospect isn't too surprising since rhododendron scales or trichomes come in many, many shapes and sizes. And there's almost as much diversity within rhododendron as there is in the entire plant kingdom when it comes to trichomes. They have many weird shapes and scales, but it appears that some may have some deterrence to rhododendron or azalea lacebug, such as ones that are hairy underneath the leaf surface may help. But overall, it did not make a difference. However, when we looked at subgenus level, we found that there was a difference, and that subgenus Azaleastrum, I guess unsurprisingly, the azaleas have were the most damaged. And subgenus Hymenanthes was the least affected, which had several with no damage at all. And subgenus Rhododendron is kind of in between, with some being very affected and some being not so much. When we broke it down a little more by section, we found that evergreen azaleas are the most affected. They're susceptible to the lacebug, and deciduous azaleas not so much, which we think is because the leaves fall off every year, so the eggs are gone, so they have to be fested every year. And then some other ones, elepidote rhododendrons were less susceptible, section ponticum. In conclusion, so evergreen azaleas are the most susceptible, and we would recommend planting less susceptible varieties. However, azaleas are planted widely in our gardens for a reason. No other section of rhododendron has the variety of color and form that the azaleas do. So if you must grow azaleas, please be aware that you may need to implement an IPM program for the azalea lacebug. So you might be thinking, how the heck would I know what subgenus my rhododendron is in? Introduce you to rhododendra.com, which has an extensive database of rhododendrons, its many hybrids and cultivars. So if you search, you can see what subgenus, section, subsection your rhododendron is in. You can even search by species and its offspring, or if you have a cultivar, you can search its parents, and found it very useful if you were interested. Great. So now I'm going to pivot to another pest azalea softfly, Urea Lebowski. I don't say that one too often. This one feeds only on Rhododendron mollis and Rhododendron occidentalis. Damage is generally restricted to the tips of the branches, but occasionally plants can be entirely defoliated. This really is the ninja of all these pests that I'm discussing. Larvae are so well matched to the color of the leaf edge that they're very difficult to find and see, especially if they're very small, teeny tiny little green caterpillars that match the color of the leaf exactly. So there they are. So it's sometimes easier to look for tiny dark specks of frass on the leaf surfaces just below where they're feeding, just below the tips usually, and then look up to find the larvae. The immatures of this are also susceptible to oil or soap sprays. So they say you can blast them off or physically remove them. I don't know. Good luck with with that. But they are susceptible to oil or soap. Don't know if I have the exact timing on those. So stay tuned. All right, next we're going to look at Dutch elm disease. So this is a native of Asia. This disease was accidentally introduced to America and into Europe, where it has devastated native populations of elms that did not have any resistance to this disease. It affects elm, ulmus, and zelkova. There are 3 species of the genus Ophistoma that are now recognized. It's spread in North America by 3 species of bark beetles. The native elm bark beetle. I'm not even try to pronounce these beetles. The European elm bark beetle and the banded elm bark beetle. But they all feed in generally the same way, bore into the bark and create these little galleries feeding on the tree under the bark. There are several ways of managing. You can inject a fungicide for prevention, or the fungicide works as a curative, sometimes in infected elms. You can also inject an insecticide, which prevents colonization by the beetles, thus preventing infection. There's also a biological treatment available. So Dutch trig is a treatment that involves inoculating the tree with a verticillium fungus. I don't recall the exact fungus that this is a pathogen for, but it does not induce disease in elms, but it does induce a immune response to the fungus, thus boosting its ability to resist Dutch elm disease. So it's kind of like inoculating for giving it a flu shot. So the UWBG currently partners with UW campus to treat all its elms with Dutch trig. So we're going to, our plan, current plan is to inoculate every elm we have every year. And if any trees do happen to exhibit signs of disease, we'll treat those with a fungicide injection. Next pest is the viburnum leaf beetle, Perialta viburnii. The viburnum leaf beetle is an invasive pest from Europe that's currently established in the eastern United States, British Columbia, and parts of Washington. And that part of Washington is the Washington Park Arboretum, as well as many others. As confirmed in the Arboretum in 2018. It was likely there many years in low densities, but it's confirmed then. Heavy infestations can cause branch dieback and death of several viburnum species, including native species and popular ornamentals. Newly hatched larvae are tiny and greenish yellow. Foliage is consumed only between the leaf veins, leaving a skeletonized leaf when feeding is complete. Starts with a few little holes here and there, and eventually it's all holes. The mature larvae, when they get big enough, will crawl down the host plant to pupate in the soil for 2 to 3 weeks. Adults then emerge and begin to feed, and they crawl right back up. They start to feed on the foliage, also skeletonizing anything the larvae may have missed or any new growth. So they really do a number on these trees or bushes. Adults then migrate to new plants. They continue to feed, punching little holes in the leaves, and then they mate and lay eggs. Excuse me. The females will chew and make small notches in the branches where they will lay an average of 5 eggs per site. And they can lay up to 500 eggs in their lifetime, which typically lasts until the first frost. So if you have many beetles laying many eggs, you get these branches full of these little notches. So not all viburnum species are susceptible to the viburnum leaf beetle. In fact, some species are not touched by the beetle at all. And a preliminary list has been compiled by Dr. Paul Weston of Cornell, which is available online at their website. But it just as a looking at the most highly susceptible ones, Viburnum dentatum, nudium, and opulus, propinquum, and Raphanus huianum are highly susceptible, and I can definitely confirm opulus is incredibly susceptible. It's often defoliated in the arboretum. And just as an aside, I'll go back. I found out recently the mechanism for resistance is that when female lays an egg on a susceptible viburnum, there's very little response. But if it lays an egg on a resistant viburnum, it'll induce this extreme callousing, which grows over the egg and actually crushes it, so that the eggs are not defend itself that way. Pretty cool. All right, next we're going to take a look at the bronze birch borer, Agrillus anxius. You're probably familiar with this pest. The bronze birch borer is becoming a serious pest of birch in portions of Washington. This native North American insect can be found wherever birch is grown as an ornamental. It generally attacks trees which have been weakened by prior attack, drought, old age, growing on less than ideal sites. Often happens in our landscapes. And we saw an increased infestation after the drought conditions of 2015. The eggs are laid singly or in small groups under the bark, sunny portions of the tree, usually. So in about 2 weeks after the eggs are laid, the larvae emerge and bore directly into the cambium, excavating galleries between the bark and the wood, and they just kind of wander around. They have these kind of wandering patterns, eating up all the good stuff under the bark. But eventually, when they're about an inch long, they will exit the tree. And they have a little, also a little D-shaped hole. So weakened birch trees are extremely susceptible to attack, and the most effective way to prevent the infestations is to keep trees healthy by regularly watering or fertilizing if they need it. Pesticide treatments can be effective, insecticides, for very important trees. Treatment of trees with over 30% of the canopy dead will often be ineffective. That's progressed a little too far by that point. American birch are generally more resistant to the bronze birch borer infestation, having co-evolved with the beetle. They have generally effective defenses against it unless they're extremely stressed. For example, river birch, Betula nigra specimens in the Arboretum were not affected at all by the beetle after the drought, while European white birch, less than 100 feet away, were severely damaged. So generally, European and Asian species are extremely susceptible. Himalayan white birch, European white birch, European white weeping birch, are extremely susceptible, while things like river birch are generally much more tolerant or much more resistant. Excuse me. All right, next we'll look at our pine collection. We have an extensive pine collection as well. Scattered all over the Arboretum, but there are concentrations in the Pinetum and Pine Hillside. We've been losing trees kind of bit by bit for the last 20 years, as far as I know. And generally, we find that they've been infested with pine bark beetles, Dendroctonus and Ips. One of our main culprits is the red turpentine beetle, Dendroctonus valens. Find this on many of our dead trees. It's native to North America and is generally considered a custodian species here. It comes in and kills already diseased or stressed trees. And it's generally not great at infecting nice healthy trees, which they'll use their sap to expel them. But European and Asian pines have no defenses and are highly susceptible, and healthy trees can be killed outright. We've seen that with a lot of our European pine species, especially. There are preventative injections of insecticide that can be done or it's also curative sometimes. You can remove infestation of bark beetles with a bark injection. I would recommend some sort of assistance with injecting them. Pines tend to have high sap flow, and it's very difficult to inject chemicals. So we use a air-powered assisted injection gun from ArborJet. And this year, we'll also be getting some monitoring and trapping assistance from WSDA. They'll be supplying the traps in. So we'll have a much better idea of exactly what kind of beetle population we're looking at the Arboretum. All right. We're going to pivot again and take a look at some pests that are not here, but pose a significant threat to our collection plants. So these are pests and diseases insect pests and diseases that we really do not want to see here. They could be devastating to both our Arboretum and to our forests surrounding us. The first one we'll look at is the European spongy moth. You're probably familiar with this one, formerly known as the gypsy moth. The spongy moth is a destructive exotic forest pest that was accidentally introduced into the United States in 1869 near Boston, Massachusetts by E. Leopold Trouvelot. So yeah, thanks a lot, dude. He was trying to find an alternative to silk, and it did not work, by the way. It is currently established throughout the Northeast and parts of the upper Midwest. I always love this photo. It is purported to be people up on ladders removing egg cases. Do you like that job? Here's a map of the current established area in the Northeast and parts of the upper Midwest. You can kind of see since it was 1869, it hasn't moved that fast or that far, but it's been slowly rolling along. On the right, you can see the forests that are susceptible to gypsy moth. And look right there, we have Douglas fir and hemlock sitka forests that are at risk. So over 300 hosts are susceptible. The oaks, willows, and birches are its preferred hosts, but it has a vast list of secondary hosts, including Doug fir and pine and spruce. That's one of the few that will happily eat broadwoods and conifers. And oaks, willows, and birches are a major part of our collection in the Arboretum. So we don't actually do any control or monitoring ourselves, but we do host extensive monitoring done by the Washington State Department of Ag. They put out insect traps, pheromone traps, which are extremely effective. See those big ears there, very good at smelling pheromones. They will attract it from miles around. So if there's any, these traps will find them. So if they do find them, they do a visual inspection for egg masses to determine where the population is located. They'll destroy the egg masses, and they will often spray Bacillus thuringiensis, BTK, is the most common product for spongy moth control. BT is specific to Lepidoptera, so it's generally very safe to spray. That's why they spray it from planes. And then they do follow-up and trapping to evaluate the success of eradication. European spongy moth has been detected in Washington several times, but fortunately, through our WSDA efforts, they have never become established. And another one to look for, especially, is the Asian spongy moth. There's a few species of Lamentria that we need to be on lookout for. They're much larger than the European counterparts. And the European spongy moth, the females don't fly. So there's only so far that they can go to spread. But the Asian spongy moth can fly long distances. So should it be established, it could jump and really become a problem really quickly. Another one we're really on the lookout for is the emerald ash borer, Gryllus planipennis. It's an invasive beetle which threatens our native ash species in hardwood forests and our urban landscapes. It also feeds on the inner bark and outer sapwood and disrupts the tree's ability to transport water and nutrients. Usually the trees are not diagnosed with emerald ash borer until severe dieback is noticed. Unfortunately, for being such a flashy, shiny, beautiful beetle, they are very difficult to spot. Early symptoms include thinning throughout the canopy and woodpecker damage is often a common way that infestations are caught early. They're going after the delicious larvae. And here we have another map of the current infested counties for emerald ash borer. And when you kind of compare it to the map on the right, which are the emerald ash borer likely detection, so this is where ash trees are located, it's spread through most of the areas that on the East Coast that it possibly can. There's still a little bit out west that it could still spread in that area, but also, unfortunately, if you'll notice on the map on the left, it was recently detected in Oregon, the Portland area. We are unfortunately kind of expecting it to show up here soon. So we have an EAB, Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan in development coming soon from a UW student, which is another nice benefit of being affiliated with the university. Our ash trees are carefully monitored for dieback in D-shaped holes every year, and high value trees can be treated with a trunk injection of insecticide every 2 years. And we're also planning on removing any native ash trees in poor condition in any of our more native areas. Other than that, don't move firewood. Emerald ash borer can survive hidden in the bark of firewood, so buy local and burn local. And similar, on the side, similar to the bronze birch borer, pesticide treatments can be effective, but if more than 30% of the tree is affected, it's often not, it's often too late. Here's an impressive one, the Asian longhorn beetle, Anaphora glabropenis, a very large, distinctive beetle, growing to 1.5 inches long, with antenna typically longer than its body. It's the name, longhorn. This also has an impressive host list, making it extremely dangerous. Although a complete list of host trees in the U.S. has not been determined, bird hosts are acer, maples, horse chestnuts, willows, American elm, birch, and sycamore, all of which are impressive, important collections at the Arboretum and in our forests as well. So we need to keep a close eye out for this one. Look for dead or fallen branches in your trees, kind of dime-sized, more like a pencil diameter. Perfectly round, though, as opposed to the D shape. These are perfectly round. And you can look for egg-laying sites on the bark. They will chip out a little divot and then lay their eggs in that divot. You can also see brass-like, sawdust-like frass in the branch crotches or at the base of trees. They're just pushing out all the sawdust as they grind through the tree. The only effective way at this point to eliminate Asian longhorn beetles is to remove and destroy infested trees. There's a really dramatic picture here from efforts in Worcester, Connecticut. That just completely changes that neighborhood for decades, generations. Sudden oak death is another one we want to keep an eye out for. It's a water mold or fungus-like organism. They're actually more related to algae than they are to fungus, which is really interesting. On trunk, it causes 2 types of diseases. On trunk hosts, it causes a disease known as sudden oak death, which is why it caused widespread dieback of several tree species in California and Oregon. It forms bleeding cankers that spread outside around the tree, eventually blocking all the conductive tissue. And on understory plants, it is a foliar and twig disease which infects but does not kill a wide variety of ornamental plants. You'll get shoot death, but mainly leaf spots and leaf blights, and especially tip death, where the water pools and you get the infection at that point. Its hosts include camellia, rhododendron, viburnum, pieris, kalmia, magnolia, Othia, and syringa. So all widely used ornamentals. Major collections in the Arboretum. It thrives in cool, wet climates. Seattle. It spreads when rain, driven by strong wind, splashes spores. And its spores can also swim. So it can move long distances in waterways and irrigation water, soil, and planting containers. And infected nursery stock has been found in over half the states in the U.S. And I think this might be my last one. Spotted lanternfly, Lycorma delicata tula. It's an insect pest of fruit, ornamental, and woody trees and vines. I think its native host, Chinese host. It's native of China, and it was first detected in Pennsylvania in 2014. I believe Tree of Heaven, its native host, preferred host. This insect will lay 30 to 50 eggs on any flat surface. They will lay at any, it is indiscriminate. They'll lay eggs everywhere, enabling them to spread quickly and easily. It uses its piercing, sucking mouth parts to feed on the sap, branches, twigs, and leaves, and it produces honeydew, which provides a medium for growth of sooty mold, which can cover leaf surfaces and everything else under that tree. So I guess with that, I'd like to thank all our partners. We couldn't do any of our work at the UWBG without a little help from our friends. Thanks to all these organizations and many more, which I've forgotten. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for that great presentation. It was nice to hear about all the different things affecting our plants, and it's nice to hear what you guys are doing to combat those.
Okay, thank you, Cece, and thank you, Ryan. So yeah, we've got some questions here, a few about cherry bark Tortrix and, well, a variety of others. But first question was, what do you spray your cherries with for Tortrix?
Well, the top of my head, I cannot remember the exact chemical, but we spray with, we have two right now. Cleary 333 Fix is one of the products, but we try to make sure that we rotate our fungicides every time we spray to try to avoid it becoming resistant. You can find that at the FRAC, the Fungicide Action Resistance Committee. And on that website, you can find the mode of action of every chemical.
Wow.
To make sure you're using a different mode of action. And you can also find that IRAC, the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee.
Okay, good resources there. Okay, next question we had about Tortrix. Are those infestations cyclical? I noticed their infestation tends to vary in seriousness from year to year.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. I'm not sure the exact reason for that. I think maybe control, and then I think variations in weather. And there are also there are some wasps that are parasitoids of this that have been found and are present. So it could be once they reach a high population, then the parasitoids also kind of keep them in check.
Right.
Populations go down again for a while. That would be my theory.
Right. I love those parasites. A question about the horticultural oil. Was neem oil something that you would use for azalea lace bug control?
It would be definitely something I would consider. I'm not sure it's labeled for that, but
right.
I bet it is. So yeah, that's definitely an option. We use neem oil in the greenhouse a lot.
I had a question about, I'm sorry, was there more?
Yeah, any oil product is good at smothering immature, soft-bodied insects.
Okay, how about with your verticillium treatments, and this is something I hadn't really ever even thought about, is there any potential for that to spread to nearby maples or other species that might be affected by verticillium wilt?
No, I think it is a different species. I'll have to look that up on, but it is not. I think it's verticillium like chrysanthemum or something like that.
Okay. Somebody had a very specific question about your the winter garden. Do you treat the Jackmontii birches in the winter garden?
We have not, to my knowledge, but that certainly would be some one that I would consider one of our more valuable.
Like
specimens.
valuable, yeah, right. A question, I've heard this before with questions about different borer beetles. Do any of those beetle species survive wood chipping? And do you have any thoughts or tools or strategies for eliminating the spread of pest species through wood chip distribution?
Yeah, I don't have any studies to back this up, but my view would be that chipping is a great way to get rid of any wood-boring insect, because it's really unlikely that they'll survive, and in that chip, there's not going to be enough material left to really get it to maturity. And if you're gonna age your chips, you're gonna cook them.
Right. Okay. I had a question. Let's see, trying to decipher my own notes. In your time, so you've been there a little over 20 years, is that right?
Yes.
Have you noticed anything weather-wise, weather patterns, climate change-wise, things change, pests come and go, or plant pests included?
Generally, yeah. There's a lot more drought stress, I would say. And periodically as well, you'll see in like after the 2015 drought, you would see a lot of bark beetle infestations. So you get a lot of, anytime a tree is more stressed, you're definitely going to see more pest pressure. And there's a lot, and then cold years will freeze some insects. So you'll have a diminished population and colder years. But yeah, weather certainly has a lot to do with, especially insect infestations.
Right. Now, I remember at Seward Park hearing a lot about fern dieback, sword fern. Is that something that you had ever noticed at the Arboretum?
I have not noticed that at the Arboretum. I've certainly heard a lot about it.
Right. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, well, that's the time that we have for questions. I'll hand it back to Kate. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan and Joel, for facilitating that Q&A session. We're going to take a quick break now. Okay, welcome back, everyone. For our next presentation, I would like to introduce Stefan Clausen, who will be presenting on the history and process of managing larger public spaces, pesticide-free. Oh, Stefan, it was sharing.
Oh, no. Okay.
And then it stopped. We're having a little bit of WebEx, things we don't love WebEx. It looks perfect right now.
Okay, great.
Stefan. Yeah. So Stefan is the Assistant Director of Sustainable Practices at Cascadia College, UW Bothell, where he manages the Sustainable Practices Bachelor Program, supports facilities and grounds management for the permaculture campus, and works with partners to create programming and education activities. Previously, he was the aquaculture education specialist for the Pacific Aquaculture and Coastal Resource Center in Hilo, Hawaii. That is so cool. At the end of his presentation, Stefan will be joined by his colleague Tyson Kemper to help answer questions about land care practices at the UW Bothell Cascadia College campus. Thank you so much, Stefan.
Absolutely excited to be able to present this. So yeah, today we're going to talk about our campus. We're up here in Bothell, Washington, so just a bit north of Seattle. We're a university and college combined campus, so a joint campus, and we have a variety of different things to kind of display and talk about for our grounds management. So our campus itself sits on the unceded land of the Coast Salish people. And so in the 1800s, it was, of course, logged like much of the area. And then there we go. And so this is the sort of site area boundary of our campus. And it was for a long time a cattle ranch. So about the last 100 years, it looked much more like this. You can still see, was it the 522? No, it's the 405, sorry. Behind us here in the picture, this was absolutely used still up into the 90s. This was just strictly cattle pasture, right? A lot of invasive grass, heavy use. You can see the straightened river here in the foreground where the actual cut was for logging and logs booms being pushed down the stream towards Sammamish River and then Lake Washington. And so in the late 90s, the state decided that we wanted to build the UW-Bothell and Cascadia campuses here and restore some of this wetland. What this actually meant for it is that they had to change it from this, right? So this is again, the kind of above landscape, so you can see from what it looks like now to sort of what it was with the straightened river throughout the entire campus. This is North Creek coming down to the Sammamish River on the bottom left here. And the two different highways to fully create this as a transformation restoration wetland. This was one of the more ambitious projects the state took on at the time. This was a large restoration wetland because at first the idea was only to simply restore about 10 acres. But the idea was to actually bring it back to a full, more established wetland perspective. So you can see they re-snaked the river, scraped a lot of the topsoil off, and then had to plant over time. Where I'm getting to all this too is that our campus has become, because of this initial wetland, a really example of what can be done for grounds management with restoration projects. And then of course, because we're talking about pesticides and pests, the pesticide-free management. I'll get all to that in a little bit. The main objectives here in this wetland restoration project was the channel restoration, creating back to natural stream morphology, and reintroducing native species and allowing natural spaces to re-exist. A lot of this was the concept of rewilding, right, to try and actually bring back wild landscapes right in the middle of our urban system because our campus is surrounded by two highways. Here you can see right in 98, this was the first scraping off. They took off about 3 inches of topsoil. They re-snaked the river by 99. And throughout the next few years, they added in flooded areas, planted over 100,000 trees so that it looked like about this from the initial plantings. You can still see the 405 behind us here and reestablishing a flooded area at this point. You can see there's initial irrigation too, and the small plantings of the trees in the foreground. Then, now this is about 2015, 2016, this is what the campus looks like much more now, right? So you can see the difference between what the initial restoration was, and this is a 58-acre restored wetland, to what it looks like more or less today. Now this is of course a winter photo, but in spring and summer it's much more green too. So this was the second largest wetland restorations on the West Coast. So this was one of the more successful projects too, because normally wetland restorations take about 10 years. This was completed in about 7. So maybe about 8 or 9 with the initial scrapings, but the full restoration was handed off by 2007 when it was due in 2010. And we've had a large restoration for different things coming back to campus, from birds, beavers, otters, right, all sorts of animals and wildlife. So this was sort of the initial inspiration. We had this 58-acre wetland. This inspired because we're a university and college campus for faculty and staff to use it for things. And this, hold on, sorry, getting a phone call. This was the idea that we could actually have this as a sort of living laboratory for students. And then in 2006, we took an example from Seattle U to go 100% pesticide-free. This was a decision to make because we wanted to, again, support our wetland, because most of our waters, because we're a hill slope wetland and hill slope campus, would actually flow into the wetland. And so we wanted to be more natural and protective of that. And then we explored what it would actually take to go 100% pesticide free. Now, this isn't just, I mean, a lot of it is just stopping pesticide use, but depending on what your actual use of your campus or your landscape is, this doesn't go as easy as just, oh, we're not going to pesticide anymore and everything will be fine, right? So this is absolutely a change in management perspective. We have a much bigger focus on our campus now because of this for natural areas. We have a lot less control of like specific species or monocultures, and we have to do a lot more adaptation with nature. This kind of management perspective kind of comes to a three kind of tier perspective. There's three kind of focuses that we have, because a lot of our spaces are still garden and like accessible spaces for students, for the public, for faculty walking around our campus. The first, of course, is ecological function. We really want to make sure that all of our landscapes are available for native plants, insects and pollinators, other birds and other mammals as they peruse our campus. And so it's much more focused on like ecological function. This picture kind of shows what we have in one of our pollinator gardens, where we leave a lot of our plants even just to die over the winter. And then when we do chop them down, we create these sort of like bee and insect houses for actual insects to use and overwinter. One of the other more controversial parts of our campus are no-mow zones. This is literally right in the middle of our campus. This is between three buildings. You can see the other buildings in the background. And back in 2015, our administration, with our help, decided that we want to have these spaces to be completely fully no-mow zones. So this was started as just stopping mowing, but then we started adding in of native plants and different sort of meadow species too, to kind of let it grow. But this was really showcasing that if you don't actually use this as an active space, a no-mow zone is a perfectly fine spot to use and let people see sort of what a more native and natural meadow looks like. This protects our ecological function again, right? This protects bees, insects, rabbits, birds, and provides seeds and habitat for them. And then it also creates a huge amount of benefits for our grounds team, because they don't have to mow it every 2 weeks. We don't have pesticide use already here too. And so then we can let this just become more natural. We're using less gas, it's using less time. This is a simple benefit, and then people actually get to see this change throughout the year, right? This is a late spring photo with the lupines and other plants coming up. In summer, it'll turn much more brown, and then in winter, it gets chopped down once a year for actual just flattening again, then led to be regrowth throughout the year. So it's a changing landscape for the students to actually be able to see. Just some other photos on that. You can see that we also try and advertise it then that it was also a sort of neat bee and pollinator protection area that way too. Oh good, yes, the video actually plays. So you kind of just see, if you're coming to our landscape, kind of what it looks like in end of spring. We even have daffodils that kind of pop up throughout there. And then it's, as you can see, right in the, just straight in the middle of the campus. We do mow this sort of edge as well to show that it's not just an abandoned space, right? People often see and ask, why is the space so messy? But usually this sort of edge kind of shows that it actually is a managed space, in the sense that it's being a more wild native meadow. And then here's just a picture from it in the late spring with the lupines. Ecological function is another big part throughout our campus. You'll see that a lot of times we're not raising things just for how they look. These are both rose plants, whereas on the picture on the left is a photo of what you'd usually expect for cultivated roses to look like. Whereas if we have rose plants on our campus, they're much more than their native varieties, where they actually have this sort of wider open spread flower that allows pollinators to still actually access it. A lot of it is here for pollinators and bee support, because we have identified with professors on our campus that here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a large number of bees. There's over 10 morpho groups, so over 40 or 50 different species of native bees. And so we've begun working on researching and tracking these bees across our campus to see what actually supports them. With this tracking, of course, this involves students. This gets the public involved. We could do a citizen science projects of watching bees, tracking plants, seeing what flowers bloom throughout the actual blooming season. And this allowed us to actually make decisions for our grounds and management for things called bloom gaps, where we identified in certain areas, because we're such a large campus, I believe over 120 some acres for our entire campus, besides the wetland, of course, that many native bees are small and only travel so far, that if there's periods of time when there are areas that don't have flowers blooming, some of these bees would actually starve. And so we have found different types of plant species. We pushed for natives where possible to close these sort of time periods called bloom gaps, to allow bees to constantly have food throughout the March through September growing season and pollinator season for the bees. This also allowed us to kind of push more for native plantings involving our community. Right, this is pushing really to try and make sure that there are flowering plants that bees can actually access, and a wide variety of flowering plants too. The research really showed that most of our bees, including, honeybees and bumblebees and other native bee species, that they are not actually specialist pollinators, that most of our bees will actually want to pollinate various different flowers. They're very much generalist pollinators. And then I want to actually kind of just showcase, because people often haven't seen this, this is actually just a photo, a variety of photos of all the different bees, and not even a comprehensive list of all the different bees we found on our campus. We have everything from tiny dark bees, which are about small, about maybe 1/4 of an inch in size, to our larger bumblebees, to different things like woolcutter bees and mason bees. So this is a huge variety of native bees that actually exist in our area. And we found that, outside of our campus, this diversity doesn't exist nearly as much if there's pesticides being used. We create this haven of our 126 acres of non-pesticide use so that these bees actually have a chance and actually can pollinate and continue in our area. So what does pesticide-free actually mean for our use in campus? So can we show all of you why you might actually consider this for your landscape strategy? This is really a management change in strategy. This is knowing when weeds come in, right? Having to actually do a lot more hand pulling. We have full-time gardeners managing the space and tracking, when invasives do come in. And then when we still have to actually use, spot treatments for, minor care, and then growing different types of plants throughout. The grounds time and management does shift, right? We have much more mowing and hand pulling. We actually use planting as a strategy to control weeds and other invasives from coming in, from shading them out to allowing things to change the landscape naturally as well. And then also making sure that when we're considering these spaces, they're really much more habitat. We're building spaces for insects and birds and wild animals. This isn't only just a human functional use or human beauty use. So. The second part of our main kind of 3-tiered approach is the multi-layered landscapes. So we really wanted to create landscapes that kind of tell a story and connect people. Again, right, we're a college campus, we're educating, that's kind of our focus, but a lot of places around us are, public parks and open public spaces that actually, connect our community for these, open green spaces. This is just a quick example of one spot of our campus where you can see that it's not just native species. We have a variety of different plants throughout here. And we understand that, while natives are often preferable to support our local species and animals, that isn't always the best case use, and it will not always prevent invasives from coming in. And this also allows the space to be a bit more wild, have different types of flowering plants throughout the year for pollinators, and then also allow the landscape to stay greener or different kind of use and perspective throughout the year. As the seasons change, this actually allows us to actually have different plants either in bloom or still green throughout the year. For that tie also is a big sort of use of cultural relevance. We really want our landscape to be culturally relevant and actually usable for our people using the campus. Almost all of our large public events actually use cut flowers from our campus. So this picture on the left shows that we actually just picked and harvested plants and flowers from our own campus, depending on what's blooming, to actually decorate, even our, this is, I think, the president's lunch. Sorry, the chancellor's lunch. We have a variety of garden spaces that are used for medicinal herbs and medicinal gardens so that people can come and pick. Because, of course, right, I mentioned we're 100% pesticide free. This means all of our plants on campus are basically safe to eat for the public. So most of our spaces that have food growing areas are open picking for the public. So people can come and actually harvest responsibly or pick whatever they need, including things like even bamboo on some areas, so that people actually on our campus for our grounds team has used bamboo functionally in the landscape. But then if people need to harvest some, we have some available for them that way too. I mentioned food areas. This has actually become a bigger kind of sort of identity for our campus. We have 4 large food growing areas now, from an apple orchard to our food forest, to a campus farm, to even this picture on the right, which is just a small herb walk, so that people have access to food. We've found even at college and university level, there's students and people who are food insecure, and having this just small available options for them throughout the year, and admittedly most of it's summer because of the growing season, this actually allows people to actually pick and harvest on their own and learn about the food and where food comes from. The story my colleague would always tell is that she actually met students who didn't know apples grew on trees, and that's just really sad to me. So we really want to be able to allow people to understand where their food comes from and being able to actually have access to it that way. I have that, yeah. And so then this comes to the third kind of perspective, where our kind of management strategy has the idea of beauty third. When you think about a garden throughout history, throughout all use, usually the idea is that beauty comes first. That people are building a garden to look beautiful, to have a beautiful green space for actually perspectives and people for view. But really the idea is that we want beauty to be the third main focus of our landscape, not the first one. Our idea was to have ecological function first, cultural relevance second, and the beauty is the third idea, where while a lot of these things from ecological function, cultural relevance then create beauty, right? People love seeing fruit trees and flowering apples and peaches and other things growing on our campus. But then the ecological function of allowing plants and safe space for insects, for pollinators to exist is really the first and primary goal of when we do our landscape management. Admittedly, right, this doesn't come without challenges. We do still deal with invasives and other weeds. We have to actually spot treat with whatever we can because we're not using pesticides, and there's a lot of hand pulling. I mean, we have full-time gardeners, which I give all the respect to. They do all the hard work and heavy lifting of our campus. And then, of course, right, we're not going to be the structured kind of lawn landscape campuses that you see and imagine for a lot of universities. We're very much different in that sense, that we're not going to have like flat green areas for people to play Frisbee on. However, then this also brought a lot of different other successes. We were one of the first college campuses to actually create a food forest, and this is again right between our buildings. It's a small quarter-acre space where we planted over 30 fruit trees and shrubs and herbs then too, to have an edible space for our, the public really, but also our campus community. When we planted this back about 10 years ago, we intentionally put in plants that don't actually grow often in Washington State. They're all naturalized for this area, of course, but not ones that produce fruit that you'll usually see in the regular grocery store. So we have plants and fruit from things like medlar, mulberry, persimmon, goumi berries, black chokeberries, and then native ones like black huckleberries and gooseberries, of course. But this was really trying again to create the experiential space for people to actually kind of go in, experience and find fruit or things that they don't normally find in grocery stores or are used to, and then being able to see and try new things this way. The other thing that we didn't intend when we initially started this, which actually was a nice surprise, was that we actually found that international students and people from other countries were astonished to see fruit that they recognized from home. The story I have from my colleague often is that she recognized medlars, which is a Middle Eastern fruit from when she was a child, and hadn't seen it in Washington or the United States since moving here. So it was a nice, kind of homecoming experience for her that way. We also pushed for several certifications, right? We're Salmon Safe certified since 2008. This is a very strict certification where you actually have to manage where all your water goes, but also what your tree cover looks like, how you actually do your integrated pest management plans. But it also gives a high accolades, right? This is one of the more strict certifications to protect our salmon and our waterways, primarily through stormwater. Almost all of our stormwater on campus actually flows to our wetland now, especially with, even from our roads. We have different capture and treatment systems, but this all goes back to straight to our wetland and actually our natural systems. And so we want to make sure it's as clean as possible. We're National Wildlife Habitat certified and Bee Campus, which also has Bee City USA certified. These are smaller certifications, but pledges to actually keep spaces open for wildlife. And then the larger one that we have now is the Rewild Your Campus Platinum certification, which is one of the highest certifications for pesticide-free. Because we're 100% pesticide-free, we're one of the few campuses that have this in the entire nation. And this actually shows and brings a lot of different accolades that way. So our campus, because of these practices, has been #1 in the nation for campus grounds since 2018. So we are this is the ASHE, which is the Association for Higher Education, so in their campus index. We won 2 different awards in 22 and 24. So doing this kind of change in landscape management has actually shown and been awarded by people to notice that we're actually making a difference this way. And then this is one of my favorite slides, is just that the news actually pays attention to. Right? Puget Sound Business Journal and area awarded us the award last year and kind of focused and featured us. But even Teen Vogue, which has been much more accessible, I guess, for teenagers now, has actually covered us and talked about pesticide-free and why that actually makes a difference, and how this really can change your kind of management perspective, but also just create something much more ecologically in scope that way. Okay. All right, and so this kind of last slide just kind of has a mix of just showing our landscapes. I want to actually showcase, right, we have a huge amount of wildlife that comes. You can see the bottom landscape. This isn't happening as much anymore, but we have a murder of crows that comes to the Bothell area and lands in our campus every night in the winter. Something like 20,000 crows have decided that this is their space to roost at night. You can see the sort of summer perspective picture from the no-mow zones again, where we actually have the things becoming much more weedy and seedy in the same perspective. And then we have just various people being able to picnic and actually use the space in the summer. We have our apple orchard just available for people to come and find apples throughout the year. The bottom right picture is our medicinal herb garden, where we actually have all these spaces available for people for, you know, with their own safety and knowing what they actually are picking, can actually use this. And then even going down to our wetlands for water sampling, training students in education, stormwater, and then of course, you know, things like pollinators and pesticide-free landscapes. So that's pretty much I have in a short presentation that way. I guess we can take questions now.
Right on, Stefan. Wow.
And yeah,
That
my
was
colleague
amazing.
Tyson is here too. He's our ground supervisor to help with
Mhm.
questions as needed.
Yeah, absolutely amazing presentation. 10 out of 10. So fascinating. I'm like messaging my colleagues being like, wow, it's incredible. Let's go visit, etc. And I'm seeing a lot of reactions from folks too. So definitely relevant stuff here. So yeah, we can hop into questions. One of the first questions we have is, what is the management strategy for the no-mow areas for any needed maintenance? And do you use a seed mix or use seed in any of your other project areas?
Tyson would be better answering for
Yeah.
that.
And I know
Yeah,
Tyson
happy
is
to.
here too. Cool.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. And I'm happy to be here with all of you. My camera is not working, so you get my name and my voice. So the no-mow space, well, in general, our no-mow spaces are like a lot of people's no-mow spaces that they might, you know, initiate on their own, which is just stop mowing what you had been treating as lawn. Which in a general case, unless you're using a ton of herbicides, is going to be a mixture of turf grasses and weedy species, whatnot. By not mowing the space, you're of course creating structure and habitat, and all those, you know, weedy species are allowed to flower, and all of that is forage and resources for pollinators and creatures. So that's a great step forward. The one pictured in the slideshow is kind of one of our more prominent spaces. It was an eco-turf seed mix as installed, and a few years later we stopped mowing it essentially. Our primary maintenance to that space is to increase diversity as much as we can, and we've found that it's hard. It's been really hard to increase diversity in these quote unquote meadows that are dominated by turf grasses, you know, non-native grasses. Some of the successes have been the lupin, Lupinus polyphyllus that you see, and yarrow, native yarrow have been really successful. Beyond that, we're trying to kind of grow up plugs and gallon-sized landscape stock and plugging them into that space, trying to get them established and hoping that they can take on a role in the community. We are just now starting to experiment with clearing the land and starting seeding from more or less weed-free substrate. And we are using the both for west of the Cascades as well as east of the Cascades a bit from Northwest Meadowscapes, their seed mixes to do some of those. So perhaps the next presentation, I can report on our successes and challenges with that project.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyson. Walker asks, so will you use pesticides sparingly for spot treatment of invasives, or maybe like, what do they call them? Like Class A weeds?
Yeah, yes, but in general, no. Our pesticide use is going to be very, 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 very low on the list. We have used pesticides only a handful, like literally less than 5 times in the last, what is that now? Almost 20 years. One was a significant knotweed patch that we had adjacent to a bioswale, kind of more on the upland portion of campus. It wasn't really established in the wetland at that time. But first we removed all of the knotweed. It was about 1/8 of an acre patch. All of the knotweed, put it in a big 50-yard dumpster to get hauled off site. We covered it all in geotextile, water permeable, but not light permeable, and left that in place for, I think it was 6 years before we felt comfortable taking it off. And then it was the escaped shoots that came through that I would spot treat individual stems, with rodeo, wetland, more appropriate glyphosate. We did a little bit of spraying of purple loosestrife around some of our pond lake areas in the wetlands, and this was in close collaboration with King County Noxious Weeds in assessing other strategies for years, and then working out a plan to do some spraying that was least impactful. But in general, no. Otherwise, it's just persistence and person power, and in a lot of senses, planting maybe not native species, but a little bit more aggressive non-native species or aggressive native species to kind of compete with weeds in areas. So more along that mindset. And then the fact that if we're having pest problems like insects and fungal and disease, we're much more inclined to just remove the plant entirely, acknowledging that there's hundreds of thousands of other plants that are waiting in the wings to try to get a foothold here. So we might try some other things.
Right on. Thank you, Tyson. Moving along here, Margaret asks, you mentioned that you have documented more bee diversity on your spray-free campus in a similar habitat with herbicides. Is it possible to share that kind of documentation or a paper on that? Okay.
Dr. Amy Lambert on our campus does this research. I believe she has a published paper showcasing this. Cool. If you want to contact us later, we can get the contact information. We can try and find it and get it to them.
Great. I imagine, but do y'all have like food harvest maps or guided tours so people can learn about what they are seeing, what they're harvesting?
We do. We have a self-guided map tour for sustainability features on campus. We don't really have like a food harvesting guide, right? It's kind of, people should know what they're picking and hopefully do their best. It's not like we're controlling or telling people what they can and can't pick. Right. And then of course people kind of pick as their own needs. So we don't really police if people over harvest sometimes. That happens here and there.
Wonderful.
And if you ever want a tour, reach out to myself,
yes,
Stefan. We do a lot of outreach. It's a big reason of why we're here. We see the entire campus as a living laboratory, and us as gardeners is not just state employees, but we're educators in all of this as well. So we make time.
Yeah, we give sometimes like a tour a month when it's really popular. So yeah.
I'm sure you'll be getting many inquiries after this. Michael asks, has there been reflection on the tension surrounding the words wild and rewild that often signify spaces absent of human interaction or even the erasure of indigenous traditions?
We've been for the second part of the question, we've been really working to try and get indigenous culture and indigenous connections back to the campus. We did a larger camas planting recently across campus, and we have a indigenous tribal liaison. Sorry, that took a while to remember. As a professor on our campus now, teaching classes and working with the tribes. So we're trying to reconnect as much as possible, and then as best as possible be good stewards of the land, as we'd hope they would want to be managing this land too. It is unceded, right? I mean, not land that we have access to, give access to for rights and things, but we can have the best relationship we possibly can make where possible.
Cool. Margaret asks, how do you manage reed canary grass in your wetland without herbicides?
Great question, Margaret. We used to, trim it and trim it and trim it and trim it, lots and lots of people hours. It proved to be futile. We've since backed off on that. It's really, we focus our energies on other things like planting and maintaining plant health and growing a canopy cover that shades out the reed canary grass is our new strategy. And it works just fine. And we're not wasting the hundreds of hours trimming these big swaths of reed canary grass that would just return in its same vigor the next year. And again, we were working with our partners from King County, not just weed to and our environmental consultants who we've had working with us from the very beginning of the wetland restoration project as kind of consultants and guides in trying these new adaptive management strategies. But we're certainly not in the business of futility. We want to be making some progress. And we're also looking at everything in terms of a long game as opposed to kind of more immediate successes as well.
Mhm. Thank you, Tyson. Matthew asks, well, first of all, can you remind us of the general acreage of the campus, and then what is y'all's staffing size? Is more time spent on audits and identifying issues, and how do y'all ramp up staff when projects require more labor power?
Campus as a whole is about 135 acres. About half of that, or about 60 acres, is the wetland restoration area. The team is roughly divided into two groups. There's a lead and one gardener, charged with the wetland restoration area, so more restoration focused. And then there are two leads and 4 additional gardeners in the uplands. One really focused on hardscapes, the other lead focused on the landscapes, and the gardener 2's all working interchangeably. So that's 8 full-time people in our full crew. And we've just become fully staffed for the first time in a decade, probably. So we're at a beautiful moment. I don't know if it's going to last, but yeah, we rarely hire outside contractors to help with landscape work. It's all in-house. We'll more likely hire out hardscape type work, contract that out if we need more labor.
Great. Well, I think with that, we're going to start to wrap. Stefan, Tyson, thank you so much. Amazing presentation. Thanks for all your answers to your questions. I'm going to pass it back to Kate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob, Stefan, Tyson. That was phenomenal. Your campus is absolutely incredible. It is such an inspiration. Okay, so now we're going to transition. We're going to hear from our own Matthew Hilliard of Seattle Parks and Recreation to discuss the joys and struggles of managing beavers on our public lands. I'm super excited for this one because I love to see what the beavers are up to at Carkeek Park regularly. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to present on today, Matthew. Matthew leads the Seattle Parks and Recreation Natural Areas crew, which supports the department's wildlife work. In the last year, as beavers have increased in population throughout Seattle, Matthew and the natural area crew have played a growing role in managing stream flows, protecting trees, and replanting natural areas that are influenced by beavers. So Matthew has over 10 years of experience doing ecological restoration work, and he's seen a myriad of benefits and challenges that beavers bring to urban ecosystems. Thank you so much, Matthew.
My pleasure. No, thanks for having me. And I just want to say that was an incredible presentation on the UW-Bothell campus. I would love to learn more about it. It's some pretty incredible work y'all are doing there. Are y'all able to see this all right?
Yes. Yeah, you're sharing your screen and now it's in presentation mode. Perfect. Okay, sweet. Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I'm here to talk about beavers and trees, and just I called it a love-hate relationship. It's really, in my mind, a love-love relationship. I got nothing but love for beavers, but they do create problems, and so some people do hate them. But yeah, I'm going to talk about work that Seattle Parks and Recreation has done to manage beavers in our park system. Generally speaking, a plan developed by the IPM and wildlife environmental analyst, which is actually Bridget Kelsch. Shout out to Bridget. She actually made most of this presentation. I spiced it up a little bit here and there. Thank you, Bridget. Also our urban forestry team and GSP, which stands for Green Seattle Partnership. So where are beavers in Seattle? really, where are they not? Beavers can be found just about anywhere in town. This map, well, this is a list on the left of parks where you can find them. This map on the right shows where there's active colonies. Each colony has about a 1 kilometer diameter territory, and the purple lines, which are a little hard to see, but they really just indicate streams or wetlands in town that are highly suitable for beavers. And so they're all over the place. Like Kate was saying, I lead the natural areas crew. We, along with the tree crew and the district staff throughout town, have managed a lot of beaver activity, particularly in Carkeek Park, as was mentioned. That's a pretty high-profile site. Magnuson, Arboretum, and Longfellow Creek, and so they are highly active and ever increasing, and I'm excited about it. Also, I'm sorry if it's a little hard to hear or understand me. I'm fighting off the tail end of a cold. So hopefully I'm not too muddled up by that. But yeah, let's go into some beaver basics. The American beaver is found all throughout the continent, North America, from way up north in the tundra, all the way down to North Mexico, and from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast. They're ecosystem engineers, and that's something that I find particularly interesting, and it makes them pretty unique as an animal. They can significantly alter the ecosystems they live within by chewing down trees and brush and building dams. They also will use mud and rocks to seal up the gaps, and they create these huge ponds. And the longest dam, fun fact, the longest dam is over half a mile, and it's in Alberta, Canada. So just for reference, the Hoover Dam is about, a human-made dam is about half that long. So pretty amazing what they're capable of. They're herbivores. They feed on herbaceous plants, and they also particularly like the bark of woody plants. That's why, along with seeing them chew down whole trees, you'll see often all the bark removed. And the ponds they create, they're kind of a safeguard for them. Like, it protects them from predators. Most of their predators, coyotes, wolves, mountain lions, for the most part, they aren't going to be as enticed to swim in the ponds to go get the beavers, and so the ponds keep the beavers safe. It also makes it easier for beavers to get around. They're mostly aquatic, they're semi-aquatic, but mostly aquatic, and it's a lot easier for them to swim around to find the food and other resources that they need. They live in families of, and they're, I also think this is pretty cute, they're monogamous and often mate for life, so they're very committed animals. And their families will include breeding pairs, and then yearlings and young beavers up to about 2 years. After that point, the beavers kind of get pushed out, the young beavers get pushed out and have to find their own territory to set up shop in, usually. And then life expectancy is about 10 to 15 years. Sadly, they were much more prevalent previously. Estimates indicate somewhere between 60 to 400 million before they were thoroughly hunted, almost to extinction. They've rebounded though, which is great news. And currently the estimate is at about 6 to 12 million throughout the whole continent. So there's a lot of benefits of having beavers in wherever it is you're working in. Here in our park system in Seattle, they bring complexity to the streams and rivers. They create wetlands. They help modulate flooding and retain water in the droughty part of the year. They also increase the groundwater recharge, fueling aquifers. You can imagine with climate change and the increased storminess that we've been getting, like stronger rains, that causes a lot of erosion, but these beaver ponds can trap that sediment created by the erosion and increase water quality. The wetlands, I think probably a lot of you know, wetlands are just hugely beneficial in a lot of ways, but many different species depend on them, and in particular, the wetlands that beavers create benefit waterfowl, amphibians, various mammals, and can also help salmon, particularly the juvenile coho in their migration through streams. These effects will vary with size and location. And you know, as I was just mentioning, with climate change, these benefits will only become more needed. So we've seen increased droughty periods of the year. The beaver ponds in particular will retain that water and support all sorts of life, from plants to animals and much more. All right, next slide. Oh, all right, yeah. So like a lot of people are concerned. I call this wildlife management. It is pest management too. Like beavers often are seen as pests. And that's what we're here for in this webinar, is managing pests. So yeah, like a lot of people, when they think of beavers, they think of them chopping down trees, cutting, chewing down trees. And they do that to create the ponds, as we talked about. This habitat is desired in a lot of instances, but we can only tolerate it so much in limited green spaces like we have here in Seattle. And so we have a need to manage beavers and control the number of trees that they chew down, because trees are also providing lots of benefits. And so the way that we do that, much in part, is tree fencing. There's a number of different ways you can approach this, but generally speaking, you want to take welded wire fencing, constructed with metal wire with holes about 2 by 4 inches, and minimum 4 feet tall. That's because beavers at maturity can be about 4 feet tall when they stand on their hind legs, and so if it's shorter than that, we've seen beaver damage in areas where the fencing is shorter. So yeah, minimum 4 feet tall. You also want to leave about a foot distance between the fencing and the trunk of the tree or the shrub that you're protecting. And that's to allow for the growth of the tree. Here on my team and generally throughout parks, we don't have time to go and make fencing larger like every year even, so we usually do it on a 3-year basis. Leaving that foot of space allows the tree to grow safely and it doesn't get girdled by the fencing. We use wooden stakes for the most part to secure the fencing to the ground and keep it in place so the beavers can't just flip it up and go under it, and so that there's some extra structural support around the fencing. You can fence groups of trees if it makes sense, if they're growing in close proximity to one another. And sometimes roots will make it really difficult to get stakes in the ground around an individual tree where there's a cluster. So often that can make sense too. And one thing to consider though is that you will want more stakes. If you're going to fence a cluster of trees, I would suggest more stakes because the larger fencing can make it more easy for the beavers to kind of tip it over or like bend it down and get in there. And then one other thing I want to mention is for another approach to this, you can use hardware cloth, and that's just, it's welded wire fencing, but it's like much tinier holes, and people usually wrap that around the tree trunk without stakes and might flare it out at the bottom, cut it at the bottom to kind of like flare it out. The thing about that is it will require more frequent modification. So just something to consider there. And then, yeah, hazard trees. So along with wanting to protect trees for the trees to keep providing the benefits they provide, one thing to consider is that beavers will create hazard trees if we aren't able to protect them in time. And so beaver chew on those larger trees, it can destabilize them if it's not all the way around or eating into the trunk of the tree significantly. The tree can survive often, but you can see in this picture, like this tree is down for the count. It's not going to survive. This is actually at Magnuson Park where beavers went crazy this last year, and we weren't able to get to many trees before they ended up like this. So some to consider, especially if it's near trails or infrastructure, places where people will be, or where there's other high value things that we want to protect in the lands that we manage. And yeah, if this occurs near infrastructure, best to consult an arborist for next actions to take and the hazard potential. So along with protecting larger pre-existing trees, we do a lot of planting. My crew does a lot of planting throughout the whole park system and natural areas. And the same fencing is pretty much the way to go for that too. You can create an enclosure around a single plant or around a cluster of plants. If it's along a shoreline or stream bank, you can fence along there to restrict access to the plants. But one thing to consider is that beavers can go often about 300 feet away from the shoreline. So you will probably want to just like put fencing around all the plants that you're installing if they will be susceptible to beavers. So woody plants really is what we're talking about. This tree is actually at Lakewood Wildlife Refuge in Southeast Seattle, just a little bit north of Seward Park. We didn't get to this tree in time. Interestingly, the beaver chewed all the way around it, like you see, but it is still standing. So this is an instance where we called the tree crew about this. They took a look at it, and we're not too worried. It's not very close to trails or areas where there's frequently people around. So we're leaving it there. The beavers don't seem to be interested in taking any more of it, but that was kind of an interesting example of beavers doing their work. All right, and so which trees to protect? Protect, and this is really like guidelines that we developed internally. So just take this for your own applications, your own agency if you're outside of Seattle Parks and Rec, and adapt it as you will, but we've found this to make sense for us. We want to protect any trees that have signs of beaver damage that are capable of hurting people or property if they were to fall over, of course. And then also, like I was saying, beavers can go about 300 feet away from the water that they're inhabiting. So if you, and I'll talk about this more in a minute, but for species that they're particularly enticed by, and you have an interest in protect those as well. You can see here, this is Montlake Playfield Natural Area where beavers have been active for years, decades actually, I think. And there's actually a really prominent lodge that you can even see from the bridge leading from I-5 to 520, or connecting to 520. All right, moving along here. So prioritize protecting the species that beavers prefer. Beavers prefer to chew on the cottonwoods, western red cedar, vine maple, and alder in particular. They also like willows and dogwood. The thing about willows and dogwood is that they seem to be well adapted to beavers chewing on them. They will readily resprout, and you don't have to worry too much about them dying from beavers chewing on them. Single stem trees that don't typically rebound, like western red cedar and alder, I would definitely recommend protecting those. Other conifers that I've seen them munch on as well include Douglas fir, Sitka spruce, shore pine. So those are a few others to consider fencing. And they have a highly varied diet. Even, I'll talk about this in a moment, but trees that they don't particularly, they're not often known to chew on, you might see damage on. So if it's a tree of high value, I would say go ahead and protect it. I would also say cottonwoods, which probably most of us are familiar with, given the highly noticeable snowy cotton that they rain down and their ability to just shed branches like no other. I personally love them, but a lot of people don't like them. I would just say they also grow really big, and they will resprout. They're a highly resilient tree, but because they grow so big and they often are near infrastructure, trails, places where people are, I suggest protecting them. If it's out in where you don't have any of that, I would say leave it. It's great beaver food. And beavers need to eat, and they eat a lot. So trees that you don't really need to worry about protecting, that includes trees like the one I showed at Lakewood Wildlife Refuge and that previous slide that are so far gone from beaver damage that they're not going to resprout. That was a red alder tree. So, and if they don't pose a danger to people or property, like it doesn't make sense to waste the resources and time on them. If the trees have been flooded by beaver activity, they've made a dam and it's created a pond, and now you have trees with the root zones underwater. Most trees aren't going to survive that, and so unless, again, they pose a danger to people or property, doesn't really make sense to protect them. That's something that we've seen at Carkeek Park in particular. They sadly they did flood out a lot of western red cedar and red alder trees. Those trees, they can tolerate light flooding, seasonal flooding, but that area is completely inundated, like pretty much permanently. So in that instance, I would skip them. Also, we in Seattle Parks and Rec, we don't really protect too many weedy tree species, again, unless they're likely to cause damage to people or property, or if they would highly impact the aesthetic or canopy of a park. So some common species that we've seen, sometimes beavers munching on, include holly, hawthorn. Actually, I wouldn't say, I'm not sure. I think I've seen tree of heaven maybe, but white poplar, black poplar, etc. And then moving on to trees beavers are beavers are likely to chew. So we just went over these: willows, cottonwoods, dogwood, red cedar, vine maple, alder, shore pine, and also big leaf maple, definitely. Often grows along streams. Less likely to chew on trees they're less likely to chew on. That would be Sitka spruce, Oregon ash, elderberry, cascara, osoberry, ninebark, and twinberry. So some shrubs in there too. And then on the right here, these are some beaver resistant plants. So again, they can resprout after beavers have munched on them. Like I said, willows and red osier dogwood, red fig dogwood. Those are two. Along with that, salmonberry, Nootka rose, and spirea. Those are pretty resilient in the face of beaver chew. Next slide. Here we go. So Jam Beavery. Shout out to Emily Hansen on the tree crew for coming up with this one. It's a fun little name that they came up with to describe a joint effort by the Natural Areas crew and Tree Crew Plus. That's the part of the tree crew that plants trees. And then also shout out to Joe from Tree Crew for helping us with this. We mapped out quite a few polygons along Lake Washington Boulevard where we've seen beaver chew occurring. And then we also caged a lot of trees in that area along the shoreline. And this is an internal effort to document where we see beaver chew occurring. And then if necessary, we install the fencing around the trees there, and we enter this data into an app that is available to staff all throughout Parks and Rec, and I believe even other agencies in the city. And this is a way for us to track it, know when we need to return to check up on the trees, repair caging, install caging, remove caging, etc. So it's been pretty phenomenal, and definitely props to Bridget for heading this up too. All right, next slide. So, and this is just a little kind of snippet of what it looks like. Yeah, we use the app, like I said, to report this information, recheck every 3 years to prevent girdling of trees from the fencing, and then the color on the map indicates, green is year 1 of installation, yellow is year 2, red is year 3. Red usually indicates a need for action on apps like this. So Yeah, just a nice straightforward way. We also mark like the damage level, the presence level of the beavers, and any other pertinent notes that people should know about. So here, this is also at Carkeek. This was pretty wild. And I don't know, I just have so much respect for beavers, their tenacity, what they will do to create the habitat that they want to see. This is a large culvert. I mean, if I had to guess, probably at its widest about 12 feet in diameter. And in this upper left photo, this is actually Steve Dam from Seattle Public Utilities and me inside the culvert deconstructing this dam. This is an instance where, you know, we try to work with beavers, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. But in some cases, we just have to remove the dam. And we removed this dam inside the culvert once. They built it back up. We came back, did it again, and then had to do it a third time. So like I said, beavers, incredibly tenacious. Love them. My back did hurt a lot after that, I'm not going to lie. But pretty phenomenal stuff. Shout out to Natural Areas crew and Trails crew. This is all of us in the bottom left, taking a photo afterwards, celebrating our hard work. So just know it can get intense managing beavers. And let's see. So yeah, like I said, we like to work with beavers when we can. Often this takes the form of what we call a notch exclusion fence installation. And this is something that I believe Beavers Northwest developed. It's a way to maintain water flow between a higher body of water and a lower body of water, typically in a stream. This is in the Magnuson wetland. These photos where beavers have also been active for years. And so in essence, it's a fence box that we install and support with T-posts, where there's a beaver dam, we notch it out, we install the box, and we maintain the fencing, keeping it free of debris so that the water can keep flowing and so that the beaver also is allowed to maintain a certain depth. And yeah, that's kind of like our main strategy for peaceful coexistence with the beavers. This is a picture at Magnuson. In this left-hand photo, the trails were getting flooded, and that's why we were called in to install this notch exclusion fencing. You know, it was eroding the trail, making it not passable for a lot of people. It immediately changed after we installed the notch exclusion fence. So I highly promote this as a way to peacefully coexist with beavers. Beavers Northwest is able to connect with folks who are interested. And like I said, they require maintenance. We've done maintenance on a number of them in town. There's also a volunteer group at Carkeek Park called Beaver Benefactors that does it too, and they educate park visitors about the beavers, salmon, and how we can all coexist and benefit each other. This is us managing a beaver dam at Longfellow Creek with, again, Steve Dam from SPU. In some cases, like we're not able to install the notch exclusion fencing, and so we just have to return and continually like notch out the dam and lower water levels. There's a private property nearby where the owner was very concerned, and so this is another strategy. It's just more time and resource intensive. And then this is again at Lakewood Sanctuary. This is the Beaver Lodge there. This is a assortment of volunteer groups and other stakeholders that have promoted protecting the beavers and also restoring the natural area there. And so we're all excited, as you can see, about seeing the Beaver Lodge. And yeah, I just want to say go Beavs. So that's what I got for y'all.
Go Beavs. We're going to have some Cougs and Huskies maybe upset with the Go Beavs.
Well, hey, you know.
But that's okay. I think wildlife is more important than sport ball in my brain. And yeah, that was amazing. We went a little over time.
Oh, sorry about
I didn't
that.
do a great job as timekeeper, honestly, because I love beavers so much, and I love seeing
Hey,
them.
you and me both.
But we're gonna
great
do,
presentation.
yeah, great. Okay, so Cece will do the. Get your credits now, guys.
Yeah, let's get our credits. This word or this hour where our code word is damn. because that's what beavers do. They make dams. And so again, you have the QR code here. You can click the link in the chat and we'll give you some time to get on there and get your information in. And yeah, you have to the end of the break once again here.
Yeah. Okay, and this is supposed to be our break time right now. So we're supposed to take a break between now and 10:25. So just a quick little bathroom break. Should we do that, or do you want to take a couple questions and people can just stay? What should we do, guys?
Yeah,
Think
I'm totally open to that. I totally understand. My bad for going over. Just
No,
I
it's
love talking
fine.
about beavers, so lost track of time there a little bit. But yeah,
It's
happy to
safe
answer some
that we-
questions.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think folks could go on break, and then if people want to stay and listen to Matthew answer some questions, if Matthew's up for that, we can do it for about 5 minutes, but we do need to take at least a small break so we can get our next speaker ready to go. So
Sounds
Right.
good.
Okay, good reminder, Bridget. Thanks.
All right, excellent presentation there.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it. And so a couple of questions. Do you use beaver deceivers or culverts? And I think we saw some culvert construction there, but any other methods that you're using?
Yeah, no, so we typically don't use beaver deceivers. Notch exclusion fencing is a kind of a different device that you can use, and we've just found it to be more effective in most situations. So we don't use beaver deceivers, or we haven't like in recent history. So we mostly just stick to the notch exclusion fencing, but it is another way to manage the flows where beavers are active, stream flows.
Great, thank you. And how long does it take for a beaver to take down a 1-foot diameter tree?
It depends. You know, it's interesting. Sometimes we will see beavers be active at a site and we'll see a little bit of chew on some trees. And then we're like, oh my goodness, like we need to fence this tree off before they take the whole thing down. And then we, might not get back there, like just because of various circumstances and work necessities, we might not be able to return for a week. But it's on the docket and we'll return and like nothing's happened. And then in other instances, they'll take down a foot diameter tree in like a day or less.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it can happen very quickly.
I would imagine species dependence too.
Definitely.
Wood density.
Mhm.
So another question, are there examples of proactive planting of like willows or other desired species in order to preserve our more desirable species?
Yeah, definitely. That's happened a lot along Lake Washington shoreline, and I think in a number of natural areas in town. Well, I know for sure where the natural areas crews worked doing replanting efforts, we often will use willow live stakes to revegetate the stream bank or shorelines, and that's a great way to offer food for the beavers while also revegetating. And like I said, they're just incredibly resilient to beaver chew, so highly promote it. Dogwood can be an effective choice too. Willows are often just kind of a happy medium because they don't grow super big, but beavers love them. So
great.
Yeah.
Another question, has Parks ever had to relocate a beaver?
Yes, I don't know of the last instance where they did. We really try and avoid it these days because they provide so many benefits, but in certain circumstances they have been relocated, and I think in this day and age we just really try to avoid it. But I know that previously they have been relocated. I would probably refer to Bridget for the last time that happened, but it's been a while. I don't know of the last time that happened. So we love them. We like to keep them around.
Yes.
I think we need to go to break now. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, we just need to take a few minutes to get ready for the next presentation to stay on time. So
Sounds good.
all right.
All right.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for having me, all.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the super short break there. We're now going to hear from our very own Clay Antio of Seattle Public Utilities to discuss Pacific Northwest native woody and herbaceous species with compelling attributes that warrant more attention in ornamental landscapes and ecological restoration. I am excited to learn about new plants from you today, Clay. For those who don't know, Clay is a horticulturalist, botanist, and environmental scientist who combines these disciplines to offer unique abilities and perspectives in environmental education. He holds many, many accolades from University of Washington, and he's been presidents and board members from organizations like the Washington Native Plant Society, the Society for Ecological Restoration, and he's also a research associate at the University of Washington Herbarium at the Burke Museum. Thanks so much, Clay.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm going to bring up my presentation here. It's all right?
It looks perfect. Yeah.
All right. The famous words of Tom Petty, it's all right. So I want to thank Bridget and her team for the opportunity to speak today. Always a pleasure, and even more so when I'm talking about native plants, one of my favorite topics. I'm reporting to you today from the 45th floor of the Seattle Municipal Tower in beautiful downtown Seattle. And I will be focused on this provocative topic, the best rarely propagated native plants for supporting IPM and biodiversity. So what we're really talking about here is constructing sustainable landscapes, right? Also known as green or ecological or low input or environmental gardening design concepts. It's about creating attractive, beneficial, and functional landscapes for as many users as possible while protecting the health of all users in the environment. So we're talking about design philosophies that focus on conserving water and energy and resources, reducing waste, reducing toxics and fertilizers, enhancing and maintaining healthy soil food webs, all critical, through composting, mulching, amendments, and so forth, and maximizing inclusivity. And we're talking in this case about not just humans, but all the other organisms that might use these landscapes, mammals, birds, insects, spiders, wee beasties, soil, microbiota, and so forth. So if you ask people that practice in this area of sustainable landscapes, often one of the lessons learned or ways that we could improve our performance in building sustainable landscapes is by acknowledging that we tend to overuse certain plants and that there needs to be a better effort to include meaningful species diversity, and not just species diversity, but also intraspecific genetic diversities in this practice of designing sustainable landscapes. And in this talk, I include both ecological restoration as well as ornamental landscapes in this concept of sustainable landscape. It's about building landscapes that really are attractive, beneficial, and functional. And sometimes you're doing that in a very controlled sort of ornamental way. In other cases, you're working more in open spaces or green spaces, more wild lands. And so that restoration activity falls into this realm of sustainable landscape that we're going to focus on today. So what have we learned about diversity, equity, and inclusion? Well, generally speaking, more species and higher genetic diversity lead to greater resistance and resilience to disturbance and stress, improved wildlife habitat, and simply stated, more interesting landscapes. And so that's where the thrust of this presentation is going today. In fact, this presentation has its root in a discussion I had last year with a student who took one of my plant identification classes. And I really appreciate that he brought this up. He was a staff person from the Snohomish Conservation District, and he indicated that the Conservation District was contemplating starting a nursery to support their restoration efforts because they were having trouble sourcing material, obtaining the quantities they needed, the quality that they required, and that kind of thing. And so they were really investigating this idea of just growing their own. And he was, of course, familiar with all the commonly available species that are used in restoration work, and you know what those are. But he wondered if they might be missing some opportunities and asked what they might be growing besides the common stuff. And boy, I was just delighted to hear that um, question, because I, for years, have been sort of keeping track of what's available in the commercial nursery trade, and not just from the restoration perspective, but also from the ornamental perspective. And I'm keeping my eye on what's not available and what could be very useful if it was available in the trade, particularly for ecological restoration in the Puget Sound region. And so I really thank James for that conversation, and have put it into a presentation, which hopefully this will be a useful thing for you today. So what's the point of this presentation? Well, the point is that Washington has a lot of native vascular plant species, and more than 2,600 of them at current count. And we're looking at just vascular plant species, not the non-vascular plant stuff like mosses, lichens, that kind of stuff, liverworts. Only a small fraction of that 2,600 count, though, is currently propagated and available for landscape use or restoration here in this region. And obviously, many of those species, of those 2,600 species, might have scant aesthetic or wildlife value. Some of them are very difficult to propagate or cultivate. Others require very specific or unusual environmental conditions that make them difficult to cultivate or use successfully in functional landscapes. I'll just give you a couple of examples here, sort of well-known examples among horticulturists and restorationists. So, for example, the subalpine rhododendron, a beautiful thing found in the high country, the subalpine of the Cascades and Olympic Mountains. Very difficult to propagate from seed or cuttings. It has been cultivated at low elevations in the Puget Sound region. If you give that species exactly what it requires, you can actually cultivate it, but very difficult to propagate. Lyle larch, this is a denizen of the high elevations of the Cascades, always occurring above 5,000 feet, loves the high elevation. Easy to propagate from seed, generally speaking, but it does not like living at sea level. And so if you attempt to grow it at sea level, the plants just look frail and then eventually perish. And then you have something like Calypso orchid in our flora, beautiful, desirable thing, would be excellent to incorporate that into restoration activities or ornamental landscapes, but essentially impossible to propagate by seed, because the seed requires a mycorrhizal associate in order for germination to happen. The seed doesn't have any endosperm, so it relies on those fungal cooperators to assist it in germinating. And to cultivate it, you have to have just the right mycorrhizal associates at the root, and it doesn't transplant well. So that's essentially difficult to propagate and impossible to cultivate. And so those are sort of off the table. But many others should be widely propagated for their functional uses, potentially, and cultivated, but are not. And in fact, many of our native species are untested. They're poorly known in cultivation. And so that's one of the exciting frontiers of horticulture and restoration here in Puget Sound region, is that much of our vascular flora is not well known and provides opportunity for discovery and surprise. So that little introduction raises some questions then as to the nursery trade in this region and beyond. We might acknowledge that plant availability in the nursery trade importantly influences how restoration is conducted, how sustainable landscapes are constructed, and how successful those restoration and cultivation efforts might be now and into the future. We might ask ourselves, well, nursery industry, what have you done for us lately? And I think it's important to acknowledge the nursery industry and some of its failings so that we can understand sort of why we are where we are currently in terms of plant availability. And I'll just point out a couple of my observations with regard to nursery practices and its impact on the availability of plant diversity. And I have some credential to speak on this. I was early in my career a manager of a retail nursery, the outdoor sales aspect of that on the East Coast, and had opportunity during that employment to interact with a lot of growers, mostly wholesale growers. And I would, be looking to buy stuff. And being a plantsman myself, I was interested in unusual things. And so I would frequently ask these growers, well, I'm looking for this species. Do you have that? And they would say, no, we don't grow that. Then I'd say, well, how about this other species? Do you grow that? No, we don't grow that. And I say, well, why don't you grow these things? And they say, well, we only grow what we sell. We can't sell those things. And I say, well, why can't you sell those things? And they say, because nobody knows about them. We grow them, nobody knows about them, and so they don't buy them. I say, well, isn't it sort of an important aspect to make them available so people can, begin to know them and purchase them? And they would routinely say, we only grow what we sell, what we can sell. And so thus it went, and that chicken and egg conundrum sometimes persists importantly today, although things have changed a little bit since that time 35 years ago when I was in the nursery industry. But still, the nursery industry is a tough business, right? Margins are slim, the work is hard, competition is intense, and so I understand the reliance on what sells, but I think there's also an opportunity in the nursery industry, and I think also an obligation among nursery professionals to actually incorporate some education in their work, to grow stuff that isn't commonly available and begin to educate their customers, their clients, as to these newly available and interesting and useful functional species. There's also in the nursery industry this lack of information as to provenance, particularly in the restoration nursery aspects. So if you ask people like, well, where did these big leaf maple come from? They will routinely respond, well, we don't know. We have no idea where these came from. It might have been Northern California, it might have been Alaska, we don't know. And that's just like a really important aspect of doing restoration work, as most of you who do that work understand. You need to know where your plants are coming from, so you have some idea of how might they adapt to where they're being planted. So it's something that I've really encouraged nursery growers over the years to do, is to begin tracking provenance of where they obtain their restoration material, so that we have a better understanding of how it might be used and how well adapted it might be to wherever it's being grown. So I would like to see that enhanced. That, of course, is an important aspect of growing trees for timber, right? For lumber. You need to, if you're growing a crop, you need to make sure that your crop, if you're investing 30 to 60 years in it, is well adapted. And so that's well known for tree species that are used for commercial timber purposes, but the aspect of provenance is pretty much lost for everything else once you get beyond those tree species that are commercially important. Another thing about the current nursery practices regarding plant diversity is that there certainly is an overuse of certain species and hybrids and their cultivated varieties. And for folks that work with trees, particularly urban forest settings, certainly understand that nursery industry relies on what sells, and things like ash, plane, sweet gum, calorie, pear, red maple, and their cultivated varieties sell. And so that is what is grown, and as a result is often overused across the world. There's also an excessive use of grafting and clonal propagation in the nursery industry. What's interesting regarding this particular development is that before the advent of cultivars, cultivated varieties, which sort of began about 1950s, plants in the nursery trade were typically seed propagated. That is to say that people would go out and collect seed of wild things, bring the seed back, and then that's what would be propagated in the nursery. As a result, you had species diversity and variability within a nursery population that was often dramatic. And in fact, many, like in the case of conifers, you'd bring back a seed lot, grow it out, and you'd find weird mutations like dwarfs or variegated forms. And a lot of those cultivated varieties that are now clonally propagated, arose originally from seed propagation of these things. And I would defy any one of you in the audience today to show me a nursery that actually grows out from seed things like the true firs, Abies vechi, Abies firma, Homolopus. Show me a nursery that is truly a seed-grown natural form, that is to say, not a dwarf or a variegated or mutated form of Chemaecyparis obtusa or Piscifera or Cryptomeria japonica. I think you see my point. Almost everything in the trade these days tends to be cultivated varieties, some weird forms of these naturally occurring species. What's also happening in the world of cultivated varietal development is there's biotechnology and genomics happening right now. So we're getting further and further away from natural genetic diversity and more towards sort of these custom, bespoke cultivated varieties, many of which, of course, are propagated clonally, exclusively licensed, making them increasingly unavailable to people for self-propagation, and then carefully managed as to market entry and introduction to consumers. So the world is changing pretty quickly with regard to how cultivated varieties are developed and presented to the consuming public. And then that brings me to my last point, which is that there really is an overemphasis on cultivars. And those cultivars tend to be developed to ensure uniformity, uniqueness, uniformity so that you can actually, develop a crop somewhat predictably, and then also uniquely so that you have a unique product to sell in the marketplace. But those unique forms tend to be focused on ornamental characteristics or size, and so you'll have this stunning diversity of shapes, sizes, and colors, as opposed to more useful functional traits such as adaptability to things like soil type, wind firmness, disease and pest resistance, long life. Those would be very useful in cultivated as well as restored landscapes, but often those functional characteristics are ignored in favor of things that are gaudy, short-lived, interesting, unique in some attractive way. And then these cultivars are typically rushed to market without adequate field tests. Many are unstable. Many demand high levels of resources and maintenance. If you've ever grown this interesting complex of heucheras, for example, the coral bells, or coneflowers, or the so-called all-summer hydrangeas, you know what I'm talking about. These are things that are gaudy. They require actually a lot of energy and resource to keep them looking good. And many of them, particularly the heucheras and the coneflowers, and I've grown many of these, tend to be very short-lived. The poster child for this point is coneflowers, Echinacea purpurea, which is a native forb in certain grassland-dominated environments in the Midwest and East Coast. Now there are some 200 cultivated varieties of purple coneflower. Most of them are selected for these unusual petal forms or colors, dwarf habit, so forth. So the question is posed, do we as human society really need more than 200 cultivated varieties of coneflower? Well, I'll just answer that for you. The answer is no in my world. These are not highly functional selections for sustainable landscapes, in my opinion. So that gets us then back to what I'm going to be talking about today, and I might provide some instructions on how you can use the information that follows. And if you're just an interested human today, interested in what I'm talking about, this will be hopefully a fun romp through our beautiful and diverse and interesting flora. If you're a nursery professional, I'd like you to think about what you've done, what you're doing, and how the nursery industry could better support the restoration and green industries. Going back to those points that I just covered. If you're an entrepreneur, there are some ideas here that might be useful for profit making or uniquely serving horticulture and ecological restoration industries. And then if you're a practitioner or a consumer, a practitioner in designing and maintaining sustainable landscapes, there should be some ideas for diversifying urban vegetation and managing green space. But just a caveat that this might be a very frustrating presentation for you, because what I'm going to be talking about are species that are not easily available in the nursery trade, or not reliably available, meaning that they might be available once every 5 to 10 years at a nursery or two, or they're just completely not available in this regional commercial nursery trade. So hopefully that frustration, though, might prompt you to do some investigation of your own, pressure your nursery colleagues to begin growing some of this stuff, or perhaps encourage you to grow your own. A lot of these things are actually super easy to propagate, so it's somewhat a mystery as to why they're not more commonly available in the trade. We'll explore some of those ideas now. So the best rarely propagated native plants for supporting IPM and biodiversity. I've roughly categorized the species that I'll be talking about, which is about 21 species, by these categories. We'll talk about some species that are known for aggressively filling space and producing allelochemicals. Very useful tools, particularly if you're doing restoration work and you're doing restoration in an ocean of invasive species or highly competitive species. We'll talk about some species that uniquely support beneficial biodiversity. I'll talk about a couple of species that'll be very useful for substituting for high maintenance problematic species like turf grasses that are commonly used. And then lastly, a group of species that are what I call future ready, what I feel would be highly adapted to future climates here in the Puget Sound region. And so this is what we'll focus on today. We're going to start off first with a couple of species that are known to aggressively fill space. And you know, if you're doing restoration, particularly if you're doing restoration within a matrix of weedy species, like I do at Discovery Park, where there is a matrix of basically highly competitive, non-native invasive grasses. If you can find any tool that will help you just fill space with desirable biological diversity instead of the sort of the inert, non-functional grasses that typically occur, for example, or blackberry that occur, then that is a good thing. And so let's talk about a couple of species that do this. You know, one of the interesting things about our flora is that many species, shrubs as well as herbaceous things, propagate asexually using rhizomes. And so we refer to those species as rhizomatous species. And I like to bring out this list when I talk about this aspect of restoration. These are the species that one would go to if you want to compete with some chance of success against things like blackberry and non-native grasses. So in this list, I have a number of shrubs for dry and moist conditions, shrubs for wet conditions, herbaceous species for both of those settings, and then a couple of trees for wet or dry conditions. Most of these species are rhizomatous. There are a couple here that actually do not propagate by rhizomes, and those would be the Oregon crab and aspen. They actually are root suckering species, and so it's incorrect to call them rhizomatous. You would refer to them as soboliferous. Isn't it great, the botanical jargon? There's a word for everything. So soboliferous means shoots coming from roots or rhizomes or stolons. So soboliferous includes rhizomatous species, but also species that root sucker. We'll talk more about populus in just a moment. Let me get rid of my, I want to get rid of this thing. There we go. I will be talking about a couple of this highlighted species here in this list today. Most of these are actually widely available in the trade, but the pink ones highlighted here are generally not. So let's explore those species. So among grasses, you know, grasses are sort of innately competitive. Many of them are rhizomatous, spread by this underground stem system, which is designed to make a clone to produce turf. Calamagrostis canadensis is one of those species that you rarely find in the trade here in the Pacific Northwest, but is relatively widespread. In the presentation of these species, the format that I like to use will include a distribution map, which is in the upper right corner here. These distribution maps are taken from the University of Washington Herbarium website. And so what these green dots indicate are actual herbarium specimens that are in the collection of the Burke Museum Herbarium. So you can go to the herbarium and actually look at a pressed, dried specimen of this species for each one of these green dots here. The orange squares are photographs of that species. And so at a glance, you can actually see where the species occurs in Washington. And you'll notice that Calamagrostis canadensis, the Canada reed, is primarily a Cascadian species, a little bit in the Olympic Mountains, but also you notice that it occurs in low elevations of the Puget Sound region. And where you find it is in a broad array of environments. You find it in wetlands, but you also find it in roadsides, particularly up in the Whatcom County area, like in the vicinity of Bow. You see a lot of Calamagrostis canadensis there. And it'll be competing effectively with non-native grasses and other things such as reed canary grass. It really does hold its own. It's a relatively tall grass. In a good site, it can get 4 to 5 feet tall. Makes a clone, as you see here in this image on the left from Schaefer Lake on the east side of the Cascades. The image on the right is from a fen in the Cedar River Municipal Watershed near North Bend, and it's growing with sweet gale. So the tawny color you see is the grass, the reddish color you see is the sweet gale. So there you find it growing in this very difficult environment of acidic, saturated soils. But you find it in a broad array of moist to wet environments, but also, as I mentioned, along droughty roadsides. So vigorously rhizomatous, wet, moist, or dry soils, competes with reed canary grass. This is a species that is native to North America and Greenland. And as a result, you'll find if you look around sources of seed for this species, but they're primarily East North American provenantial. So you'll need to be careful in locally sourcing your seeds or plants because seed is being offered elsewhere in North America. What else should I say about this? Where it is abundant, Native Americans did use this for things like fiber, making mats and rugs, and used it for bedding as well, particularly Canadian Native peoples. So has an interesting ethnobotanical interest. I'll also include in these slides what I call hot takes, sort of a snapshot of some of the highlights of a particular species that will direct your attention to important characteristics. Another fascinating grass is rice cutgrass, Leerzia oryzoides. Rice, in the common name, refers to this plant's relatedness to rice, and the name actually oryzoides means rice-like. The plant is named after a guy named Lear, who collected this species. Actually, no, he didn't collect it. He was German. He was a botanist and pharmacist in Germany. He had a strong interest in grasses, and this was named commemoratively for him after he passed away, and named in 1788. So this genus has been around a long while. The name cutgrass refers to the fact that this grass will cut you because it has these serrated leaf margins. And I am not kidding. You walk through a stand of this in shorts or in short sleeves, and you will be bleeding by the time you exit. I've experienced that myself. It actually has torn my field pants, having walked through stands of this in Oregon, where it's more abundant than it is in Washington. In Washington, you'll notice that it actually has a wide distribution. It is found in eastern as well as western Washington, but it's scattered throughout western Washington, primarily in wetland habitats. It is a grass that is aggressively rhizomatous, tall, bold grass, can get 4 to 5 feet tall in a good site. It'll take very deep inundation, but will also tolerate moist soils and even sites that dry out completely near the end of the growing season. In this image on the right from the Willamette Valley in Oregon, you see basically a vernal pool that dries out, except for the middle part, which is where this taller cattail vegetation is. But this lower vegetation in front of the cattail is entirely Leerzia oryzoides. It's rarely used in wetland restoration, primarily because there are limited nursery sources for seed or plant material, unfortunately. This is a species that competes well with reed canary grass. It's an excellent plant for restoration just because it's able to occupy space, has relatively large seed, which is good for waterfowl. This plant often occurs where there's open water and waterfowl, and takes deep standing water. Let me show you a couple of locations where this occurs. If you want to actually see this in action, one of the best places is down in Vancouver, Washington, in the Burnt Bridge Creek area just east of the Vancouver Lake. This is open to the public, and you get to see it really beautifully developed stands of rice cut grass. And then I was stationed up in the Cedar River Municipal Watershed for about 9 years and had the opportunity to observe this species in a kettle lake habitat. So kettle lakes are lakes that intersect groundwater, so it's the only source of hydrology. And so as the groundwater basically declines through the summer period, these kettle wetlands begin to dewater. They don't completely dewater in most years, but in some years, rarely, like once every, I don't know, guessing 10 to 12 years, these kettles will completely dewater. And I was witness to this one year when there was a complete dewatering of these kettle wetlands. And in the very deepest part of these kettles, and particularly this one in the upper left, a plant community emerged that was dominated by Leerzia and Scirpus. Otherwise, these plants are dormant for years until these kettles dewater and they can begin to grow and reproduce. So a pretty interesting plant here, Leerzia oryzoides, a plant that really should be used much more frequently than it is, particularly in restoration, wetland restoration. Next plant is slide alder, Ulmus alnobetula. You might actually know this as Ulmus sinuata or sitchensis or viridis. It's undertaken a number of different taxonomic changes over the years as botanists have attempted to figure out exactly what its correct name should be and how it's related to other alders. In this state, most people might think of it as a montane species associated with avalanche chutes, for example. But in fact, in this distribution map, you'll see that it is widely distributed, not just in the Cascades and the Olympics, but also in low elevation Puget Sound region, and also in the east side here in the dry country of Lincoln and Spokane and Whitman counties. It is a fast-growing, broad-spreading shrub. So here's a plant that doesn't actually reproduce by rhizomes or sobols, but rather is aggressively filling space just with a very large, fast-growing body. And my reference for this is a plant that's growing at Bridle Trail State Park at the north end in Kirkland there. And it is fully 30 feet high and 50 feet across, densely branched, very twiggy. So it's a really dense body, broad and tall, casting shade below it. And so very effective there for consuming space. So it's a plant that I would love to use in my work, knowing that it actually is native to a low elevation Puget Trough, but I am unable to obtain this species unless I grow it on my own. So a huge shrub, or is it a small multi-stem tree, sort of like vine maple? Nobody knows. Densely branched and twiggy, presumed to have been previously more abundant in Puget Sound than it is currently, primarily, presumably, due to habitat loss. And then also keep in mind that the species would be nitrogen fixing, of fast growth, and also has broad environmental tolerances. So it'll take wet soils to very dry soils, as where it occurs in Bridle Trail State Park, very dry, gravelly outwash kind of site. Anyway, so slide alder, something to keep in mind if you're looking for a big, fast-growing nitrogen-fixing plant to take up space in your restoration work. Beautiful glossy evergreen leaves identified as ulno betula by these doubly serrated leaf margins. Let's look at a couple of plants that produce allelochemicals. There's bracken. Bracken's the old English word for fern, so we won't say bracken fern because that's repetitive. Bracken is easily identified by these broad triangular stems and a rhizomatous habit. It's not a clump-forming fern. It's broadly represented in our state, except in the driest parts of the Columbia Basin. Aggressively rhizomatous, very broad environmental tolerances. You can find it in fens and bogs to sandy shoreline environments, very well drained places. This is a plant that just is not grown in the nursery trade, presumably because people think it is perhaps a little too aggressive. But again, sometimes aggression is desired. This is a plant that has many uses, actually. It is edible. A lot of people will collect the young fiddleheads as they're emerging, but be alerted that those do cause cancer in laboratory animals. They contain high levels of a glucoside, which is a major carcinogen, causing hemorrhagic disease and blindness. So you just want to minimize your intake of these. In my world, if I had access to 1 gallon or 2 gallon nursery stocks, I would be planting these all over Discovery Park. They are amazingly tenacious and competitive, and in part because they produce large amounts of chemicals, particularly this proanthocyanidine, which is a condensed tannin that inhibits growth of competing plants. It can become what some ecologists might consider a super dominant species, a plant that literally excludes all other competition. And sometimes you need that kind of hammer in restoration work. You'll notice in this image that the rhizomatous habit, the allelochemicals leach from the green fronds and litter, and then also the phenolics and other secondary metabolites that this fern produces are known to change soil microbiota and soil properties. So literally changing the soil food web to its advantage, changing pH to its advantage, and so forth. That's exactly what many weeds do once they begin invading. They'll begin to change the soil environment to their benefit. So here's a native species that is found on every continent except Antarctica, which is a noble claim to fame because few plants can claim that. And a plant that's been around for 55 million years. Literally appears in the fossil record 55 million years ago. So bracken, a plant that I would love to get my hands on. Easy to propagate from those rhizomes or from spore. Another plant that produces allelochemicals is Baccharis pilularis, coyote brush. And in our state, you'll notice that it's actually quite rare. In fact, it's on our state threatened list. And that's why they don't give you the exact locations here, because it is a listed species. Baccharis is a very large genus, over 500 species, mostly subtropical. In our neck of the woods, this species reaches the very northern extent of its distribution, hence its rarity here. But it is a beautiful, desirable ornamental. It's evergreen, dioecious, meaning there are male plants and female plants. The females are slightly more attractive because the fruits on the females are showy. It's in the sunflower family. A plant that often has a coastal affiliation, needs sun and well-drained conditions, but it tolerates salt. And in fact, you'll often find it in coastal settings, as this map suggests. And it produces a number of allelochemicals that retard growth of competing vegetation. And what's also notable about Baccharis pilularis is that it is known to host many species of insects, wasps, beetles, butterflies, and moths, as well as birds will use it because it has a very dense shrubby character in the wild. There are cultivated varieties of this. It's much more abundant in Oregon and California. And so in California, they've selected some forms, but you'll want to be careful with those because those are probably not as cold hardy as we would require here at the northern extent of this species range in Washington. So probably desired to collect locally, locally grown material from northern Oregon or Washington, if you know where to get this plant. Easily propagated from seed. How about some plants that support beneficial biodiversity? Well, stinging nettle, most people know that this plant is host to many species of insects. It's wind pollinated though, so that's somewhat surprising, but it is a larval host plant for many species of butterfly and moth, including angel-winged satyr and the red admiral butterfly. It's also a very nutritious plant. I know people who routinely go out in the early spring to collect the emerging shoots to eat them, make tea and concoctions out of them. Stinging nettle is widely distributed in Washington, easily identified by its opposite leaves, these coarsely toothed margins, and these very small flowers that are designed for wind pollination. You might not recognize the name though, Urtica gracilis. You might more easily recognize the name Urtica dioica. But recently, botanists decided that what is native to North America is gracilis, which used to be a subspecies of dioica, and dioica is mostly Old World, Eurasian in distribution, but dioica is actually now introduced to North America, and so we have both our native form, gracilis, as well as dioica. The difference between the two is that dioica is dioecious, you have male plants and female plants. Gracilis has male flowers and female flowers on the same plant. So the botanists have forced us now to sex our nettles to be able to determine whether it's the native species or the non-native species. Just a caution there on the stinging hairs. They contain an acid cocktail. Most of you have probably experienced that. The hairs here are designed to break off, shown in the upper left there. They contain an acid cocktail dominated by formic acid largely. So when you break those hairs, you basically suffer an acid burn. And you all know what the first aid treatment for acid burns is, I presume. Now, if I asked you in lowland Puget Sound region, what's the earliest flowering native shrub? If I was in person, I would actually query you. Most of you probably would say that it is osoberry, Indian plum. But I would beg to differ. In my garden, the first plant in all years has been lob gooseberry, which is a beautiful thing that you never see in cultivation. I got my plants from a friend who grew it from seed. In our state, it is somewhat rare. It's presumed to have been more abundant previously, but now, due to primarily logging and habitat loss, it is much less common. It's a deciduous a shrub with spines, so it's great for controlling human passage through restoration work or confining them to spaces in cultivated landscapes. It takes dry shade or sun, flowers January through March for me. So this thing was in full bloom for most of February, just coming out of flower now. It's a good early pollinator and hummingbird support plant. In my garden, I see early emerging bumblebees on this as well as hummingbird. And in fact, it also has a red berry. If you have multiple individuals, you can get fruit on this in your restoration site or garden, and birds will take those. So really interesting plant, very ornamental in the garden, has these beautiful fuchsia-like flowers at a time when little is happening in the wilds or in your garden. So highly recommended. Ribes lobi, named after William Lobb, who worked as a botanist for the nursery Veitch and Sons in England. Most people know David Douglas, who was sort of the early 1800s plant explorer of the west coast of North America. But William Lobb, much less known, followed sort of in his tracks and explored primarily Oregon and California, and not introduced only this plant, but many other plants that we know today, including things like giant sequoia and monkey puzzle tree. So has an interesting history there. He was the first to have introduced this species and those species to Western science. Here's another query for you. If I was in person, I would see how many people knew about our second native broadleaf evergreen tree species, Washington flora. Most people would know that madrone is one of those, but what's the second? Most people don't know that. I would estimate 2 out of maybe 50 people would know that. In fact, it is golden chinkapin, Chrysolepis chrysophylla. That Latin name translated means golden scale, golden leaf tree. And this is another species that is at the northern extent of its range in North America. It's a coastal species in North America, but ending in Washington. So it's actually a listed sensitive species with us. Hence, again, you see these squares that indicate broad location, not specific location. This is a remarkable tree for its beauty. It is an evergreen with a golden pubescence, primarily on the lower leaf surfaces, and just a really beautiful thing. Unfortunately, very difficult to propagate, almost never in the trade. I've seen it once in my 35 years of looking in the nursery trade. It takes intense dry shade, but it's best in full sun without irrigation. It's also very slow, unfortunately, but worth trying, as shown here. This photograph on the left is from Old DuPont and is just a remarkable open grown specimen of this species. But the reason I bring this up is this is in the oak family, and as you probably know from Doug Tallamy's work with oaks, that oaks generally support a real high level of biological diversity in terms of insect life, and this is no exception. This is the host plant for the rare golden hairstreak butterfly, along with a couple of other evergreen oak species, and that's what that butterfly looks like. And I don't think that the insects that use this species have been well investigated. In fact, as I was doing a little research, I found that there's just recently a new species of gall wasp that was discovered on Chrysolepis chrysophylla, illustrated here in the lower right. That little beast is only 2 millimeters long, which is pretty amazing. So a plant that really should be cultivated more, appreciated for its beauty here in Washington, but virtually impossible to obtain. Another great plant for attracting pollinators is Ceanothus cuneatus, the common buckbrush. In Washington, there is one site where it is known to be a natural population, and that's in Klickitat County. The Chelan County population is thought to be planted, so that doesn't count. But you can still say that Ceanothus cuneatus is a native species here. As you know, most most Ceanothus are just intense magnets for attracting bees and other things. And so just a really excellent plant for taking full sun, well-drained soils without irrigation, excellent bee support. It's also a larval host for a number of butterflies, including the tortoiseshell, echo blue, swallowtail, and hedgerow hairstreak. A couple species that I would mention that would be useful to explore as replacement species for traditional turf grass species would include the fathead sedge, Carex pachystachya, well distributed in Washington. It's a cespitose grass that takes mowing or cutting to the ground, and when seeded densely will form actually a turf, not a rhizomatous species. Can become summer dormant, but it is winter evergreen. That is to say, when the rains return, it will send out fresh leaves through the winter and into the spring. And then California oatgrass, Anthonia californica, also a cespitose clump-forming grass, evergreen, taking shade or drought. It is found in both the east side as well as the west side of the Cascade Range here, including low elevation Puget Sound. It takes mowing and foot traffic, and sometimes even a co-occurs with the fathead sedge. But no one's really explored the possibility of using those two species as turf grass species, you know, where it's the the turf is mowed frequently, subjected to foot traffic and so forth. I think this would be a great master's project or an excellent project for a nursery to begin exploring and documenting a little better than we might currently have at this time. And then there's a bunch of future ready plants that I have in my presentation here. I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. Alaska onion grass. It's found on both sides of the Cascades, including low elevation environments. It is routinely found in dry understory settings, typically under conifers. It's a beautiful clump forming grass, about 3 feet tall. Early flowering can become summer dormant, but it is just very useful for dry understory conditions. Competes well with other things that you might find in the understories of those habitats. Henderson sedge, a beautiful broadleaf, pleated leaf sedge, again cespitose, found on the west side of the Cascade Mountains and then into the Columbia River Gorge. Evergreen, very attractive thing, tolerant of dry shade, well-behaved clump former, somewhat short-lived, but recedes gently into places it likes. And in my garden, it pops up in places where I would not expect it. I presume that the ants are distributing it around, just as they do with Asarum or Trillium or Dicentra. The seeds may have a little fat body that the ants like, and so they haul those seeds around with the fat body that's attached to those seeds. Here's a plant that would seem unlikely as a candidate for cultivation, the white mountain avens, which is found in very high elevations of the Cascades, but is easily cultivated at low elevations. The first time I saw it was in the parking lot of Iselli Nursery in Boring, Oregon. They had beautiful patches of this, and then the image on the right is from a garden in eastern Washington. Evergreen, slow creeper, makes large patches, very drought tolerant, needs full sun, sharp drainage, doesn't like foot traffic, likes limestone, easily cultivated. And then there's a hybrid between our white mountain avens and the yellow mountain avens, which is a sensitive listed species in Washington, called Sundermanii, which is actually available in the nursery trade that caters to rock garden enthusiasts. And so that actually is also relatively easily cultivated. I want to check that out. Here's one that I would use routinely in my work, the pyramidal spirea, which is a hybrid, naturally occurring species hybrid between hardhack and birchleaf spirea. You'll notice it's completely intermediate between those two species. Naturally occurring hybrid species, vigorously rhizomatous, and you find it growing in anywhere from bogs and fens to other types of wetlands to rock outcrops. So just this incredible tolerance of soil and moisture types, and a beautiful thing, the pyramidal spirea found throughout the Cascades of Washington here, and including some low elevation locations in Western Washington. Western viburnum, most people don't know that we have a viburnum that's native to Washington, but this is a very well-behaved large shrub, drought tolerant, takes dry shade or full sun. It does attract pollinators. It's got beautiful flowers and fruits. It is closely related to Viburnum dentatum, which is arrowwood, and you'll notice that Ryan spoke of this as dentatum as one of the susceptible species of viburnum to the viburnum leaf beetle. And reports from Alex Wright from the Bellevue Botanic Garden suggest that it is highly susceptible to that. But I grow it in my garden and has really enjoyed its large presence, flowers, and fruits. And I'll just go through the rest of these quickly here.
Yeah, we're at time. That picture of your garden was absolutely gorgeous, Clay.
Yeah. So just the last words here. There are some great internet resources if you want to research some of these plants. And there are some garden resources where these species are cultivated. And finally, that's who I am. And you're welcome to reach out to me if you would like a copy of this presentation or chat about any of these species. And this is also going to be recorded. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. This presentation has been recorded and it will be put online. And Bridget will send that out after I get that up on the SPU, on some of the SPU web pages.
Great.
It's not going to be on multiple web pages. It'll be on one. What I'm talking about. Clay, is this your garden?
It is, yeah. An aerial view of it.
Wow. That is amazing. It's really gorgeous. So Cece's going to do the polling question now so that you guys can get credit, and then we'll do a little Q&A, and then I'll just wrap us up. I have a couple announcements right at the very end.
All right. Well, I'll start with questions, I think. Thank you, Clay. It wouldn't be pesticide research without a talk from Clay Antio. And here's another one for the books, and it was super interesting. And as usual, there's tons of questions. So we'll just start with the first one that came in. Are there any resources or studies done on how cultivars of native species affect native populations in woodlands? Specifically interested in, say you get an ornamental columbine from the nursery, and then how does that work? Does it move into the natural area? What's the impact?
So that's a great question. So people are interested in this very topic. The species that are being investigated are primarily Eastern North American species. And so they're looking at, for example, if you use cultivated varieties of purple coneflower, what is the function of those in a garden or a restoration? How are those cultivated varieties used by pollinators as compared to native forms? And the research is now coming out, as people have been doing research over the last, I would say, 10 years on this topic. What they're generally finding is that cultivated varieties of these native species tend to be less used by pollinators, and that's where the focus has been on this research, is pollinator support. It's the native forms that pollinators tend to queue on, not so much the so-called improved cultivated varieties of those species forms. In terms of our native flora, I would say that we're certainly not as sophisticated as the folks using stuff on the eastern half of our country. So there's been not similar studies involving our species here. For example, one might be interested in knowing whether cultivated forms of Ribes sanguineum are used similarly as native forms of the red flowering currant. We just don't have that information here. There's anecdotal stuff, but no good hard science that documents that kind of difference.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. What are your thoughts on direct seeding versus container grown plants?
Yeah, I've tried both methods in my restoration work, and seeding almost always fails because of the competition from mostly in where I grow, where I do my restoration, from the very competitive grasses and other things that are found there. So the success that I find in restoration work is from containerized material. And I just have sort of moved away completely from doing any kind of seeding, because whenever I seed, that seeding is really overwhelmed by non-native invasive grasses. But in terms of propagation, certainly I would support seed-based nursery propagation as opposed to asexual clonal propagation, just to obtain as much genetic diversity in that population in the nurseries as possible.
Okay, thank you. Are there any best management practices out there that use this concept of an aggressive species to compete and limit noxious weeds? For example, I've noticed that there's alleolithic properties of laurel that sometimes stunt the growth around them, but I'm wondering if this can be used in an intentional way with a native species instead of something like a laurel tree or laurel hedge.
So I'm not quite understanding the question. The reason I brought up the concept of allelochemicals is that one needs to fight fire with fire, so to speak. And if you start understanding how weeds work in a habitat, you begin understanding that they're not just occupying space, but they are actually changing the environment substantially, physically, biologically, chemically, changing the environment. And so if you can actually introduce native species that are able to do that through the use of their allelochemicals, then you are basically hedging your success, right, by using some tools that invasive species are also using. And so like bracken fern, like as I mentioned, if I had access to that, I'd be planting it all over Discovery Park because it is, where it does occur, clearly is showing competitive success, even in the face of invasive grasses, blackberry, so forth. So it's about being aware of how weeds work and being purposeful about using native species in a similar way in your restoration activity.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Yeah, no, it's a cool concept. What is your opinion on the assisted migration of species? Sort of the response to climate change. We'll bring some plants that thrive down south up here. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't. I have strong opinions on it. I'm not a researcher in that topic, but I have been following the trends. It is happening. People are doing assisted migration. My feeling is that things are changing rather, relatively dramatically, and people have also sort of screwed things up royally here in terms of ecosystem integrity and their biological diversities. And so I would say that it's probably not too much risk in assisting species in migrating, and will probably actually end up benefiting as human populations grow and as the impact of those human populations is manifested in ecosystems.
Okay. What someone wants to know what.
We're actually at time, Steve and Clay. So thank you so much. I'm sorry that we don't have more time for questions. Maybe if you are able to, then you can type them up and Bridget can send out kind of that Q&A. I thank you so much, Clay. That was wonderful. I also want to give a big thank you to our other presenters today, Ryan Garrison of UW Botanic Gardens, Stefan Clausen of the UW Bothell Cascadia College campus, and his colleague Tyson Kemper, Matthew Hilliard of Seattle Parks and Recreation. Also, big thank you to the entire IPM webinar recertification committee who organized this event today. So Bridget Kelsch, our chair, Steve Sosi, Mark Malone, Jacob de Guzman, Cece Miller, Joel Ferrero. I'm also on this committee. And a big thank to all of you for joining us today. Again, today's session was the final webinar of the City of Seattle's three-part webinar, IPM webinar series for this year. Bridget will be sending a link to the recording and other shared information when it becomes available. However, for those who are interested, more WSDA credits will be available for free through King County Noxious Weeds programs Into the Weeds webinars, and those will be held in May. Also, when you leave the webinar today, WebEx will automatically direct you to a feedback survey. If you could please take the time to provide that feedback, it would be much appreciated. We really do read that feedback. It really helps us to plan our future webinars. And we will be back in Q1 of 2026 with more webinars for WSDA Research and ISA Arborist credits. And I look forward to seeing everybody there. Thank you so much. And hey, happy spring. Spring now.